You have just woken up as a zebra in the scorching African savanna. For the next 3 hours, you are going to experience a sprint from hungry lions, a risky river crossing with crocodiles, and even a clash with a rival stallion. And this won't be easy, so good luck. But before we get into this journey of a zebra, I'd appreciate it if you could subscribe, like the video, and why not leave a comment on where you are tuning in from and what animal you want me to cover next. Now, let's begin this epic adventure together. The world begins as a whisper of gold threading through purple darkness. My eyes open to catch that first breath of dawn, when the sky holds its breath between night and day. The grass beneath my hooves carries the weight of dew, each blade bent with crystal droplets that will vanish before the sun climbs higher. There's a particular scent that comes with this hour, sharp and clean, like the inside of a green stem broken open, mixed with the earthy musk of soil that has spent the night drinking moisture from the air. My nostrils flare, pulling in information that my eyes cannot yet see. The air carries stories written in molecules, tales of which way the wind has traveled, what creatures have passed through this space in the darkness, whether danger lingers in the tall grass beyond our resting place. Each breath is a question asked and answered in the language of scent, a conversation older than memory. Around me, the herd stirs with the practiced quiet of creatures who know that dawn brings both opportunity and peril. 43 of us scattered across this stretch of plain, our stripes creating a puzzle of black and white that confuses the eye even in growing light. We are individuals, yet we move as water moves, following invisible currents that pull us toward safety, toward food, toward the ancient rhythms that have kept our kind alive for countless generations. The grass here reaches my belly, thick and unmarked by the teeth of other grazers. This is what we've been seeking through the night's slow migration, this feast of green shoots that sprouted after the rains 3 days past. My stomach contracts with anticipation, a hollow ache that speaks of lean times recently endured, of long treks across barren ground where only dust and dying scrub broke the monotony of survival. A soft nicker passes between 2 mares near the edge of our group, a sound like breath shaped into meaning. The message ripples through the herd without urgency, a gentle wake-up call that says all is well. It is time to begin the day's work of staying alive. My ears swivel automatically toward the sound, cataloging its tone and finding comfort in its familiarity. This is Kessie's voice, the old mare whose scars tell stories of 30 seasons survived, whose instincts have guided us through droughts and floods, through the migrations of predators and the shifting patterns of rain. The horizon lightens from black to deep blue to pale yellow, and with each shift in color, the landscape reveals more of itself. Acacia trees stand scattered like ancient sentinels, their flat crowns dark against the brightening sky. Between them, the ground rolls in gentle swells that could hide a crouched lion or reveal the distant movement of other herds. Everything must be read, interpreted, filed away in the constant catalogue of awareness that keeps death at arm's length. My hooves shift against the earth, feeling the give of soil that has not yet hardened under the day's heat. The sensation travels up through my legs, a tactile message about the ground's stability, its capacity to support a running zebra should the need arise. Even standing still, my body gathers information, preparing for whatever the day might demand. The first flies of morning begin their lazy orbits around my head, early scouts for the armies that will follow once the sun climbs higher. I flick my tail in automatic response, a movement so ingrained it requires no thought. By midday, these tiny irritants will form clouds around every member of the herd, but for now they are manageable, merely another element in the complex symphony of sensations that define existence on the savanna. Somewhere in the distance, a hornbill calls, its voice cutting through the soft sounds of awakening grass and settling dew. The sound carries information about the bird's location, its level of alarm, the presence or absence of the insects it hunts. Everything on the plains speaks to everything else, creating a web of communication that extends beyond any single species. We are all connected by the shared imperative of survival, all participants in the ancient dance between predator and prey, between abundance and scarcity. My neck stretches down toward the grass, testing the air one more time before committing to the vulnerable position required for grazing. The scent carries no warning, only the sweet promise of nourishment and the faint mineral tang of earth that has been touched by rain. This is the moment of decision that comes dozens of times each day. The choice between caution and hunger, between safety and sustenance. The herd begins its slow shuffle toward the richest patch of grass, a movement that appears random but follows patterns established over generations of trial and error. We spread out enough to avoid competition for the best shoots, yet stay close enough to benefit from the many eyes and ears that multiply our chances of detecting danger. Each zebra becomes both individual and part of a larger organism, pursuing personal needs while contributing to collective survival. The sun breaks free of the horizon, sending long golden fingers across the grassland. The dew begins its retreat, rising as invisible vapor that will join the clouds and return as rain in its own time. The day has officially begun, and with it, all the challenges and opportunities that daylight brings to creatures who must earn each breath through vigilance and wisdom. Morning graze, vigil. The first bite of grass fills my mouth with the taste of growing things, sweet and slightly bitter, carrying the mineral essence of soil and the clean flavor of captured rainwater. My teeth work in steady rhythm, cropping the tender shoots that will fuel the day's survival. Each mouthful is evaluated by senses older than thought, testing for the right texture, the proper moisture content, the absence of anything that might harm rather than nourish. Around me, the quiet symphony of feeding begins. 43 sets of teeth working against grass stems, creating a sound like distant rainfall on leaves. The rhythm is hypnotic, peaceful, yet underneath runs the constant current of alertness that never sleeps. My ears move independently of my head, one turned toward the acacia grove where lions sometimes rest, the other monitoring the approach routes from the rocky outcrop 200 meters away. Dew still clings to the grass tips, beading on my muzzle as I work through the richest patch. The moisture tastes of night air and growing things, carrying a freshness that will vanish once the sun climbs higher. These early hours provide not just food but water, precious drops that supplement what we'll drink later at the river. In the dry season, this morning moisture can mean the difference between thriving and merely surviving. A young colt named Django works the grass near my left shoulder, his technique still clumsy with youth. He tears at the stems rather than cropping them cleanly, wasting energy and creating more noise than necessary. His inexperience shows in every movement, but he learns by watching, by copying the efficient motions of the adults around him. Survival skills cannot be taught through words. They must be absorbed through observation and practice, refined through countless repetitions, until they become as automatic as breathing. The morning air carries the scent of other creatures beginning their day. Somewhere beyond the visible horizon, a herd of wildebeest moves through their own feeding routine. Their musk reaches us on the shifting breeze, along with the sharper smell of Thompson's gazelles and the dry dust signature of ostrich. The savanna is waking up, and each species follows its own schedule, its own strategy for extracting life from this harsh and beautiful landscape. My vision sweeps constantly across the terrain, taking in details that could spell the difference between life and death. The way grass bends in a pattern that suggests recent passage, the quality of shadows beneath distant trees, the behavior of small birds whose alarm calls might herald the approach of something dangerous. A zebra's eyes see differently than human eyes, catching movement more readily than detail, designed for detecting the subtle shifts that announce predator presence. Kessie raises her head suddenly, her scarred muzzle testing the air with quick, sharp breaths. The entire herd freezes, 43 hearts beating in suspended animation while our matriarch processes whatever message the wind has delivered. Seconds stretch like hours until she lowers her head back to the grass, signaling that whatever she detected poses no immediate threat. The feeding resumes, but the interruption reminds us all that safety is temporary, that danger can announce itself at any moment. The sun climbs higher, burning off the dew and beginning the daily process of transforming the cool morning into the furnace of midday. Already the air shimmers slightly in the distance, the first hint of the heat mirages that will dance across the horizon once the temperature climbs past the threshold of comfort. We have perhaps 2 hours of good feeding before the heat forces us to seek shade and enter the drowsy alertness of hot weather survival. My tail swishes automatically at the growing number of flies that have discovered our presence. These early arrivals are scouts for the massive swarms that will plague us later, but for now they remain manageable. The motion of tail flicking becomes part of the feeding rhythm, a dance between nourishment and pest control that every grazer on the plains must master. A soft whinny passes between 2 of the younger mares, a contact call that maintains the social bonds holding our herd together. The sound carries comfort and familiarity, a reminder that we are not alone in this vast landscape. These vocalizations flow constantly through the group, too quiet for distant predators to detect but clear enough to maintain the invisible threads that connect us to each other. The grass here grows in patches of varying quality, creating a natural mosaic that requires strategy to navigate efficiently. The richest areas draw multiple grazers, but crowding reduces individual feeding success. The poorest patches offer little nutrition but can be grazed without competition. Each zebra must balance these factors constantly, reading the subtle signals that indicate where the best feeding opportunities lie. My stripes catch the growing sunlight, creating patterns of shadow and brightness that shift with every movement. These markings serve purposes beyond simple identification, creating optical illusions that confuse the targeting mechanisms of biting flies and make it difficult for predators to single out individuals from the group. What appears decorative to human eyes serves vital survival functions in the harsh arithmetic of life and death on the African plains. The morning breeze carries new information as it shifts direction, bringing scents from areas we cannot see. The smell of elephant dung from yesterday's passage, the musk of hyena, old enough to suggest they have moved on to other hunting grounds. The green smell of the river, still distant, but promising relief from the heat that builds with each passing hour. All these messages filter through nostrils designed to read the chemical signature of survival. A hornbill lands on Django's back, its weight insignificant, but its presence meaningful. The bird seeks the insects stirred up by our movement through the grass, while its sharp eyes and quick alarm calls provide early warning of threats we might miss. This partnership, repeated millions of times across thousands of generations, represents one of the countless cooperative relationships that make life possible in places where survival depends on every advantage, no matter how small. Dust bath ritual. The patch of fine orange dust lies in a depression where the wind has carved away everything but the finest particles. It calls to an itch that goes deeper than skin, deeper than the mere irritation of parasites. This dust holds the promise of relief, of cleansing, of the ancient comfort that comes from rolling in earth that has been blessed by countless generations of hooves and hide. I approach the dust wallow with the careful steps of a creature who knows that even the most basic maintenance activities require vigilance. The depression lies exposed, offering no cover from watching eyes, yet the need for this ritual overrides caution. My nostrils test the air one final time before I commit to the vulnerable position that dust bathing requires. The first sensation comes as I lower myself to my knees, feeling the soft give of dust that has been pulverized by wind and hoof until it achieves the consistency of powder. This fine earth will work its way through my coat, reaching the skin where ticks and mites make their living from my blood. The dust will suffocate them, dislodge them, provide relief from the constant irritation that comes with life in a place where every creature seeks to feed on every other creature. Rolling onto my side, I feel the dust cloud rise around me like incense. The particles catch the morning light, creating a golden halo that transforms this simple maintenance into something almost ceremonial. My legs kick with the automatic movements of pleasure, stirring the dust into fine clouds that settle slowly back to earth. This is joy reduced to its most basic elements. The satisfaction of an itch scratched, a need met. A moment of peace carved from the constant demands of survival. The dust tastes of minerals and time, carrying flavors that speak of the rocks from which it came and the countless hooves that have disturbed it before mine. Iron and quartz, feldspar and mica, ground down through countless seasons until they achieve this perfect fineness. Each grain carries the history of mountains worn away by wind and weather, now serving the humble purpose of cleaning parasites from zebra hide. Other members of the herd wait their turn, forming a loose queue that maintains the spacing necessary for safety while acknowledging the universal need for this ritual. Young ones watch the adults with attention that goes beyond mere curiosity. They are learning the proper technique, the timing, the social etiquette that governs even this most basic of activities. Nothing in zebra life exists in isolation. Every action carries lessons for those wise enough to observe. My rolling motion creates a rhythm that matches some deeper pulse, some ancient beat that connects me to every dust-bathing creature that has ever lived. The sensation of fine earth against skin triggers responses coded in genes older than memory, satisfaction that transcends the merely physical. This is comfort at its most primal level, relief that speaks to needs that predate consciousness. A red-billed oxpecker lands on my exposed side as I roll, its sharp beak immediately going to work on the ticks it can see among the dust. The bird's presence adds another layer to the cleaning process, mechanical precision complementing the chemical action of the dust. Its feet grip my skin with tiny claws, holding steady against the movement of my rolling, while its beak works with surgical accuracy. The bird's behavior triggers a complex emotional response. Part of me wants to shake off this intrusion, to complete the dust bath without interference. Yet deeper wisdom recognizes the oxpecker as an ally in the endless battle against parasites. The slight pain of its probing beak is nothing compared to the relief it provides. The precise removal of bloodsuckers that the dust alone cannot dislodge. 3 more oxpeckers arrive, drawn by the feast of parasites, disturbed by my rolling. Their red beaks flash like tiny flames as they work, creating a sensation like being touched by small fires. Each successful extraction of a tick or mite sends a pulse of relief through my nervous system, a reward that reinforces the wisdom of tolerating these feathered physicians. The dust begins to work its way deeper into my coat, penetrating through the outer guard hairs to reach the softer undercoat where the smallest parasites hide. Each grain acts like a tiny abrasive, dislodging eggs and larvae that would otherwise mature into biting, blood-sucking adults. This is preventive medicine at its most basic level, the disruption of life cycles that would otherwise drain my strength and health. Rolling over to expose my other side, I feel the cool breath of morning breeze against skin that has been warmed by the friction of dust and movement. The contrast creates a sensation of freshness, of cleanliness that goes beyond the merely physical. This is renewal at the cellular level, the restoration of skin's natural defenses against the countless tiny predators that seek to make their living from my body. The oxpeckers adjust their positions with the fluid grace of creatures perfectly adapted to their unusual profession. Their feet maintain purchase on hide that shifts and moves, while their heads dart with mechanical precision toward any movement that might indicate a parasite. They are living tweezers, evolutionary specialists, whose survival depends on their ability to clean other creatures more efficiently than those creatures can clean themselves. My tail whips in automatic response to flies that gather around the disturbance, drawn by the scent of dust and dislodged parasites. The motion creates small dust devils that swirl around my body, adding another layer to the complex choreography of cleaning and maintenance. Every part of my body participates in this ritual, each movement serving multiple purposes in the efficient economy of survival. The dust carries scents that speak of other creatures who have used this wallow before me. Buffalo and elephant, antelope and warthog, all have left their chemical signatures in this fine earth. The overlapping smells create a library of information about who shares this territory, when they pass through, whether they carried any signs of disease or distress. Even in the simple act of cleaning myself, I gather intelligence about the world around me. Young Django approaches the edge of the wallow, his inexperience showing in the tentative way he tests the dust with one hoof. He has watched the ritual countless times, but has not yet learned to trust completely in the vulnerability it requires. His hesitation speaks to the fundamental tension that governs all life on the savanna, the balance between necessary risk and prudent caution. Every action carries potential consequences, and even the most basic maintenance activities must be weighed against the constant possibility of danger. The sensation of clean skin begins to emerge as the dust completes its work. Freed from the constant irritation of parasites, my hide feels renewed, refreshed, ready for whatever challenges the day might bring. This simple ritual has restored not just physical comfort, but psychological equilibrium, the deep satisfaction that comes from successfully meeting a basic need in a world where nothing can be taken for granted. Riverbank detour. The scent of water reaches us long before the river comes into view, a clean dampness that cuts through the dry heat beginning to build across the savanna. It speaks of life in liquid form, of the essential element that makes survival possible in this land where moisture is precious beyond measure. My throat contracts with anticipation, remembering the taste of cool water flowing over a tongue made rough by constant grazing on coarse grass. The trek toward the river requires a careful balance between need and caution. Water sources draw every creature for miles around, creating convergence points where predator and prey must share space according to ancient rules written in blood and necessity. The path we follow has been worn smooth by countless hooves over countless seasons, a highway of survival that speaks to the fundamental importance of this daily pilgrimage. Casey leads us with the measured pace of experience, her scarred hide telling stories of 30 seasons spent navigating the delicate politics of waterhole society. She knows which approaches offer the best visibility, which bends in the riverbank might conceal a waiting crocodile, which times of day bring the highest risk of ambush. Her knowledge has been earned through encounters that killed lesser zebras, lessons written in the currency of survival itself. The ground beneath our hooves changes as we near the water, becoming softer and more yielding with each step. Clay mixed with sand, pressed into a consistency that holds hoofprints, like a record of all who have passed this way. The tracks tell stories to those who know how to read them. The urgent stride of gazelles fleeing danger, the measured pace of elephants moving to their own ancient schedule, the broad pads of lions who visit this place when darkness provides cover for their hunting. My nostrils flare constantly now, testing each breath for the chemical signatures that could spell doom or safety. The air carries layered messages, the green smell of reeds growing in the shallows, the musky scent of hippos somewhere upstream, the sharp mineral tang of water that has traveled through rock and soil to reach this place. Underneath it all runs the faint but unmistakable odor of reptile, the cold scent of creatures who wait motionless in the shallows for unwary visitors. The first glimpse of water sends a surge of relief through the herd, 43 hearts beating faster at the sight of survival made manifest. The river flows brown and sluggish between banks lined with papyrus and reed grass, its surface broken by the occasional swirl that could indicate current or could indicate something more dangerous moving beneath the surface. Everything about water sources demands interpretation, constant evaluation of risk versus reward. A family of warthogs occupies the prime drinking spot, their tusks and aggressive reputation earning them priority in the complex hierarchy that governs waterhole access. We wait our turn with the patience of creatures who understand that water politics can be more dangerous than water shortage. The warthogs drink quickly and efficiently, their eyes never stopping their scan of the surrounding terrain. Even the most confident drinkers know that water makes everyone vulnerable. The warthogs finish and trot away with the characteristic bustle of creatures who prefer to be anywhere but the open ground around water sources. Their departure signals our opportunity, but approach must still be managed with care. Kessie advances first, her years of experience making her the natural choice to test the safety of the drinking site. Her hooves test each step, reading the ground for signs of instability or concealed danger. The riverbank slopes gently into water that appears deceptively calm. Below the surface, currents swirl with the force of water that has traveled hundreds of miles from distant mountains. The flow carries sediment that gives the water its brown color, mineral-rich silt that will provide trace nutrients along with hydration. This is not the clear water of mountain streams, but the complex brew of nutrients and life that characterizes rivers in places where every drop must work harder. My muzzle touches the surface, and the first sensation is coolness against skin, warmed by morning sun and the exertion of travel. The water tastes of earth and minerals, carrying flavors that speak of the long journey from source to mouth. Iron and calcium, traces of salt from ancient seabeds, the faint sweetness of dissolved organic matter. Each sip provides not just hydration, but information about the health of the watershed that feeds this vital artery. The drinking technique requires constant vigilance, head down, vulnerable to attack, yet senses must remain alert for any sign of danger. My ears swivel continuously, catching every sound that might herald the approach of predator or competitor. The splash of water against the bank, the rustle of reeds in the breeze, the distant call of a fish eagle searching for prey in the deeper pools upstream. Ripples appear on the surface 20 meters downstream, concentric circles that could indicate fish feeding or could indicate something much more dangerous investigating the disturbance caused by our presence. Every zebra at the water's edge sees the movement simultaneously, heads lifting in synchronized alertness. We watch the spot with the intensity of creatures who know that crocodiles can remain motionless for hours before exploding into motion faster than thought. The ripples subside without revealing their source, but the message is clear. This place tolerates our presence, but does not welcome it. We are visitors here, temporary beneficiaries of a resource that belongs ultimately to those who live beneath the surface and those who hunt from concealment in the reeds. Our survival depends on taking what we need quickly and departing before overstaying our welcome. Young Django approaches the water with the clumsy enthusiasm of youth, his inexperience showing in the way he splashes rather than drinking cleanly. The noise draws sharp looks from the adults, reminders that survival often depends on doing necessary things as quietly as possible. He learns through gentle correction and observation, his techniques improving with each drink as he masters the art of efficient hydration. The water flows over my tongue in measured gulps, each swallow timed to match the rhythm of my heartbeat. This synchronization is not conscious but instinctive, a coordination between systems that maximizes the efficiency of hydration while maintaining the cardiovascular readiness necessary for sudden flight. Every aspect of drinking reflects the brutal mathematics of survival in a place where inefficiency kills. Other creatures wait their turn at respectful distances, the complex etiquette of waterhole society playing out according to rules established through thousands of generations of trial and error. Size matters, but so does aggression and group cohesion. A single Cape buffalo might claim priority over an entire herd of gazelles, while a family of elephants receives deference from every other species regardless of numbers or need. The taste of home lives in this water, the familiar blend of minerals and organic matter that defines the territory we know. Rivers carry the chemical signature of the land they drain, creating unique flavors that help orient creatures to their position in the vast landscape. This water tastes of home, of the specific combination of soils and stones that characterize our range. To drink it is to reaffirm belonging, to taste the essence of the place that gives our lives meaning and context. Shade, heat haze. The acacia tree stands like an island of relief in the growing furnace of midday, its flat crown offering precious shade to creatures wise enough to claim it before the heat becomes unbearable. The temperature has climbed past 38 degrees, transforming the air into something that shimmers and dances, creating illusions that fool the eye and confuse the senses. This is the hour when survival means finding ways to endure rather than ways to thrive. My body seeks the coolest patch of shade with the instinctive wisdom of creatures who have learned to read the subtle gradations of heat and relief. The northern side of the tree offers the deepest shadow, the ground here cooler by several degrees than the sun-baked earth just meters away. These small differences become matters of life and death when the temperature climbs beyond the body's ability to cool itself through normal means. The breathing changes now, becoming deeper and more deliberate as my body works to maintain internal temperature within the narrow range that supports life. Each breath feels warm and dry, the air seeming to extract moisture rather than provide it. Panting becomes a conscious technique, a way of using the evaporation of saliva to cool blood that circulates too close to the surface of overheated skin. Around me, the herd settles into the drowsy alertness that characterizes hot weather survival. Eyes remain open but half-focused, ears still mobile but moving more slowly, the entire nervous system shifting into a lower gear that conserves energy while maintaining the basic awareness necessary for safety. This is not sleep, but something between sleep and waking, a state that allows rest while preserving the quick reflexes that keep death at bay. The heat creates its own soundscape, a subtle symphony of expansion and contraction as wood and stone respond to the climbing temperature. The acacia's bark creaks softly as the trunk expands, while somewhere in the distance comes the faint tick of cooling rock. These sounds join the constant drone of insects to create a natural lullaby that speaks of landscapes shaped by extremes of temperature and time. Mirages begin to dance across the distant plain, creating the illusion of water where none exists. Lakes appear and disappear with the shifting of air currents, perfect reflections that mock the thirst of creatures who know better than to trust what their eyes report. The shimmer creates false horizons, making distant objects appear to float above the ground or disappear entirely into walls of liquid silver. My tail works constantly now, no longer just swishing at flies but creating the small breeze that provides marginal relief from the pressing heat. The motion requires energy that my body can barely spare, but the alternative is to surrender to the clouds of biting insects that see our vulnerability and gather in increasing numbers. Every movement becomes a calculated trade-off between energy expenditure and immediate comfort. The flies have multiplied beyond counting, forming dense clouds around every warm-blooded creature unfortunate enough to be abroad during the heat of the day. They settle on any exposed skin, their numbers so great that killing individuals makes no difference to the overall assault. Survival requires learning to tolerate rather than eliminate, to accept the constant irritation as simply another cost of staying alive in this demanding environment. Heat waves rise from the ground in visible columns, distorting the view of anything more than 100 meters away. The landscape becomes fluid, uncertain, subject to constant reinterpretation as thermal currents bend light and create false images. A distant antelope might appear to be floating, while a tree can seem to melt and reform with each shift in the superheated air. Navigation becomes a matter of following landmarks that exist above the level of these thermal distortions. The shade provides more than coolness. It offers psychological relief from the oppressive weight of direct sunlight. Under the acacia's canopy, the world feels manageable again, reduced to the size of the shadow that protects us from the sun's assault. This small circle of comfort becomes our entire universe during the hours when the heat makes any other activity impossible. Django pants beside me with the rapid, shallow breaths of youth, learning to cope with extremes his body has not yet fully adapted to handle. His technique improves as he watches the adults, copying their measured breathing patterns and the way they position themselves to catch any hint of breeze that might stir the superheated air. Education continues even in the depths of discomfort. Survival skills passed down through observation and necessity. The insects create their own weather system within the shade, their combined body heat and moisture adding another layer to the complex microclimate that exists beneath the tree. Beetles and flies, moths and mosquitoes, all seeking the same relief we seek, all contributing to the dense, humid atmosphere that makes breathing feel like drinking soup. Yet, their presence also indicates safety. Predators avoid the clouds of insects that would interfere with their hunting efficiency. Far in the distance, dust devils dance across the open plain, miniature tornadoes born from the collision between superheated ground and slightly cooler air above. They move with erratic purpose, following paths determined by invisible currents and pressure differences. Their spiraling columns carry dust and debris high into the sky, before dissipating as suddenly as they formed, brief reminders of the powerful forces unleashed when temperature extremes collide. The heat creates hallucinations that go beyond simple mirages. Exhausted animals see movement where none exists, water where only dust lies, shade where the sun beats down unrelenting. The mind, stressed by temperature and dehydration, begins to manufacture the relief it desperately needs. Survival requires learning to distinguish between genuine perception and the hopeful lies that heat can make the brain tell itself. My skin feels tight and dry despite the shade, moisture drawn away by air so parched it seems to actively pull water from any source. Saliva becomes precious, rationed by instincts that understand the complex chemistry of hydration and heat stress. Every drop of moisture lost must be carefully considered against the body's reserves and the distance to the next water source. The sun reaches its zenith, transforming the sky into a dome of white heat that presses down on everything beneath it. This is the hour when only the most desperate or most foolish venture into the open, when even the hardiest desert creatures seek shelter and wait for the sun to begin its afternoon descent. Time moves differently during these peak hours, each minute feeling stretched by the effort required simply to endure. Somewhere beyond the reach of our senses, other herds wait out the heat under their own chosen shelters. Elephants gather in the deepest shade they can find, using their great ears as fans and their trunks to spray dust that provides temporary cooling. Buffalo wallow in mud holes, coating themselves with protective layers that insulate against the sun's assault. Each species has evolved its own strategies for surviving the daily trial by fire that defines life on the African plains. Savannah Sound Map. The afternoon air carries voices across vast distances, each sound bearing information vital to survival in a landscape where knowledge means the difference between life and death. My ears have become sophisticated instruments, capable of distinguishing between the rumble of distant thunder and the approaching thunder of thousands of hooves, between the alarm call that signals genuine danger and the contact call that simply maintains social bonds across the scattered herd. Thunder rolls across the horizon, but my trained senses immediately recognize it as atmospheric rather than terrestrial. Real thunder carries a different quality, a rolling bass note that speaks of moisture and pressure systems building beyond the visible sky. The sound of approaching hooves creates its own thunder, but with a rhythm and cadence that no weather system can match. Each type of sound requires its own response, its own level of alertness and preparation. From the direction of the river comes the splash and snort of hippos defending their territory against some unseen intrusion. The sound carries clearly across 2 kilometers of open ground, aided by the thermal currents that lift and carry vibrations during the heat of the day. Each grunt and bellow provides information about the mood and activity level of creatures whose temperament can affect the safety of any animal seeking water. A fish eagle calls from somewhere upstream, its piercing cry echoing off the water and surrounding rocks. The call speaks of successful hunting, of prey caught and consumed, but also of eyes that see everything that moves within the eagle's territory. These aerial predators serve as early warning systems for ground-dwelling creatures, their alarm calls often the first indication that danger approaches from an unexpected direction. The herd has spread out across several hundred meters of grazing ground, each zebra maintaining acoustic contact through a continuous exchange of soft nickering and gentle whinnies. These contact calls create an invisible network of communication that allows the group to function as a single organism, despite being scattered across terrain that could hide a dozen different threats. Each voice carries its own signature, its own identifying characteristics that allow instant recognition even at distances where visual identification becomes impossible. Young Django's voice still carries the higher pitch of adolescence, a sound that will deepen over the coming seasons as his body matures into adult proportions. His calls often carry more urgency than necessary, the vocal equivalent of the inexperience that shows in his movements and decision-making. The adults tolerate his vocal enthusiasm while providing gentle corrections through their own measured responses. Kessie's voice anchors the entire acoustic network, her deep contralto the result of decades spent calling across savanna distances. Her sounds carry authority and calm, the vocal signature of a mare who has survived everything the plains can offer and earned the right to guide others through the maze of daily dangers. When Kessie calls, every ear in the herd turns toward her voice, ready to interpret whatever message she needs to convey. The wind itself becomes a carrier of information, bringing scents and sounds from areas beyond our direct observation. A shift in wind direction can suddenly fill our ears with the distant lowing of cattle from human settlements, the barking of wild dogs coordinating a hunt, or the trumpeting of elephants announcing their presence to any who might challenge their passage through disputed territory. Alarm calls have their own vocabulary, distinct sounds that convey specific types and levels of danger. The sharp bark that announces aerial predator differs markedly from the snorting alarm that signals ground-based threat. The intensity and repetition of calls provide additional information about proximity, size, and probable intent of whatever has triggered the warning. A zebra who cannot interpret these vocal signals accurately will not survive long enough to pass on its genes. From the rocky outcrop where dassies make their home comes a constant chatter of social interaction, punctuated occasionally by the sharp alarm whistle that these small mammals use to warn of approaching danger. Their elevated position provides them with an overview of the surrounding terrain that makes their warnings valuable to creatures who lack such vantage points. The partnership between ground dwellers and cliff dwellers has been refined over millennia of mutual benefit. The insects add their own layer to the acoustic environment, creating a background hum that changes in pitch and intensity with the temperature and time of day. This natural white noise can mask the approach of danger, but it also provides baseline acoustic information against which unusual sounds stand out with startling clarity. When the insect chorus suddenly stops, every animal within hearing distance knows to freeze and listen for whatever has caused the silence. Somewhere beyond the visible horizon, a pack of wild dogs celebrates a successful hunt with the distinctive whooping calls that carry their excitement across kilometers of open ground. The sound triggers automatic responses in every prey animal within hearing range, not because the dogs pose immediate threat at such distance, but because their success indicates hunting conditions that might attract other predators to the area. The quality of sound changes throughout the day as atmospheric conditions shift with temperature and humidity. Morning air carries sound differently than afternoon air, while evening brings its own acoustic characteristics that experienced animals learn to read and interpret. The same call that travels 5 kilometers in the cool of dawn might carry only half that distance during the heat of midday, making distance estimation a constantly changing challenge. Bird calls provide a continuous commentary on the state of the local environment, each species contributing its own perspective on safety, food availability, and the presence of potential threats. The harsh cry of a ground hornbill indicates successful foraging and general calm, while the mobbing calls of smaller birds suggest that something dangerous has entered their territory. Learning to interpret this avian news network is essential for any ground-dwelling creature that hopes to avoid becoming someone else's meal. Territorial disputes between rival zebra stallions can be heard from great distances, the squealing challenges and thundering hooves creating acoustic signatures that convey information about herd dynamics, seasonal breeding activity, and the shifting territories that define social structure across the plains. These sounds require careful interpretation, as they can indicate either local social reorganization or the approach of unknown herds with their own territorial claims. The distant roar of a lion carries differently than any other sound on the savanna, its deep bass notes designed to travel vast distances and convey unmistakable messages about power, territory, and hunting intent. Even a lion calling from several kilometers away demands immediate attention and careful analysis of wind direction, terrain, and probable hunting patterns. No sound on the plains commands more instant respect or triggers faster decision-making than the voice of the apex predator announcing its presence to the world. Flash hunt, escape. The cheetah appears as if materialized from air itself, its spotted coat blending so perfectly with the dappled shadows of dry grass that my eyes register movement before my brain processes the shape as predator. One moment the world contains only the peaceful rhythm of afternoon grazing, the next it explodes into the elemental terror of hunter and hunted, survival stripped to its most basic mathematics of speed versus distance, reaction time versus striking range. Adrenaline floods my system before conscious thought can form, every cell in my body responding to signals older than memory. My heart transforms from the steady rhythm of grazing to the thunderous percussion of maximum effort, pumping supercharged blood to muscles that will either carry me to safety or fail me entirely. The transition happens in microseconds, the difference between life and death measured in the speed of nervous system responses, refined by millions of years of evolutionary pressure. The cheetah moves with liquid grace, its stride stretching and compressing like a breathing thing as it accelerates toward the killing speed that makes it the fastest hunter on Earth. Each bound covers impossible distances, the cat's body seeming to float between contacts with the ground. Its yellow eyes lock onto young Django, who has wandered slightly apart from the main group, his inexperience making him the logical target for a predator that must succeed quickly or abandon the hunt entirely. My own acceleration feels clumsy compared to the cheetah's fluid motion, yet within seconds, I am running faster than my body should theoretically be capable of moving. The desperate chemistry of survival overrides normal limitations, flooding muscles with strength borrowed from systems that will demand payment later. Every stride stretches to its maximum extension, hooves striking the ground with percussive force that sends shock waves up through legs and spine. The herd responds as a single organism, 43 individual survival instincts coordinating into collective action without planning or discussion. We swerve as one entity, creating a moving wall of black and white stripes that confuses the cheetah's targeting systems. Our synchronized movement transforms individual vulnerability into group strength, each zebra's survival linked to the survival of every other member of the fleeing mass. Django runs with the desperate energy of youth discovering its own mortality, his long legs finally finding the coordination that has eluded him during normal movement. Terror provides the teaching that peaceful practice never could, every stride a lesson in efficiency learned under the ultimate pressure of immediate consequence. His survival depends entirely on his ability to maintain pace with adults, whose experience has taught them exactly how fast they must run to stay alive. The ground blurs beneath my hooves, each hooffall precisely placed to avoid the holes and obstacles that could transform escape into catastrophe. At this speed, A single misstep means death as surely as the cheetah's claws. My vision narrows to a tunnel focused on the terrain directly ahead. Peripheral awareness compressed to the essential task of maintaining balance and direction while running at the edge of physical possibility. Behind us, the cheetah's breathing becomes audible, the harsh panting of a predator pushing its cardiovascular system to the breaking point. Cheetahs can maintain top speed for only short distances before their bodies overheat and force them to abandon the chase. Our survival depends on lasting longer than the cat's ability to sustain its attack, on forcing the predator to choose between catching prey and preserving its own life. The sound of our collective hoofbeats creates its own thunder, 43 sets of legs striking earth with the force of desperation channeled into forward motion. The rhythm varies slightly as individual gaits find their own optimal frequency, but the overall effect is a drumroll of survival that drowns out everything except the essential sounds of breathing and the predator's approaching footfalls. Dust rises in clouds around our fleeing forms, creating a brownish haze that provides minimal concealment but maximum confusion. The churned earth fills the air with particles that catch sunlight and create brief moments of visual chaos. These microseconds of reduced visibility might be enough to break the cheetah's visual lock on its chosen target, forcing the cat to waste precious energy reacquiring its prey. My lungs burn with the effort of processing air fast enough to feed muscles operating at maximum capacity. Each breath becomes a conscious effort, the automatic rhythm of normal respiration replaced by the desperate gasping of a body pushed beyond its comfort zone. Oxygen debt accumulates with each stride, a bill that will come due the moment the immediate crisis passes and normal physiological limits reassert themselves. The cheetah begins to fall behind, its initial burst of speed gradually surrendering to the zebra's superior endurance. What the cat gains in acceleration, we match with stamina, our bodies designed for sustained effort rather than explosive sprints. The predator's breathing becomes more labored, its stride beginning to show the subtle signs of fatigue that will soon force it to break off the attack. Casey leads the escape with the steady pace of experience, her scarred hide testament to previous encounters that ended in survival rather than death. She knows exactly how fast to run, how long to maintain the pace, when the danger has passed and normal movement can resume. Her leadership transforms panicked flight into strategic retreat, individual terror into collective wisdom. The dry grass whips against my legs as we pass, each stem a tiny lash that speaks of the speed we have achieved. The vegetation blurs into a continuous wall of brown and gold, punctuated by the occasional acacia tree that serves as a landmark in the desperate geography of escape. Navigation becomes instinctive, guided by senses trained to read terrain at any speed. Gradually, the space between hunter and hunted increases. The cheetah's pace slackens first to a lope, then to a trot, finally to the dejected walk of a predator that has burned its energy reserves without achieving the kill that would justify the expenditure. Its sides heave with exhaustion, yellow coat darkened with sweat, the magnificent hunting machine temporarily reduced to a tired cat recovering from failure. Our own pace begins to decrease as the immediate threat recedes, but the slowdown is gradual and controlled. Bodies operating at maximum efficiency cannot simply stop without risking injury or collapse. The transition from desperate flight to normal movement requires careful management of muscles flooded with lactic acid and cardiovascular systems running far above sustainable levels. The cheetah stops entirely, standing motionless except for the rapid rise and fall of its chest as it recovers from the failed hunt. Its yellow eyes track our continued retreat without malice or frustration, merely the calm assessment of a predator calculating whether another attempt might prove worthwhile. The cat's expression contains no anger, only the practical evaluation of energy reserves and hunting opportunities that governs all predator behavior. Regroup, heartbeat calm. The silence that follows escape feels profound after the thunderous chaos of the chase, broken only by the harsh sound of 43 zebras learning to breathe normally again. Our bodies remain scattered across several hundred meters of trampled grass, each animal processing the transition from mortal terror to survival in its own time and manner. The immediate danger has passed, but the echoes of panic still reverberate through nervous systems flooded with chemicals designed to sustain impossible effort. My heart pounds against my ribs with a force that seems capable of breaking bone, each beat a percussion that reverberates through my entire body. The rhythm gradually slows from the frantic tempo of maximum exertion towards something approaching normal, but the transition feels endless. Each heartbeat marks another second of survival, another moment snatched from the jaws of death through speed and collective action. Django stands 20 meters away, his sides heaving like bellows as his young body learns what it means to run for life itself. His eyes remain wide with the residual shock of discovering how quickly safety can transform into mortal peril, how thin the line between existence and extinction. Sweat darkens his coat, despite the dry heat, evidence of effort that pushed his cardiovascular system far beyond its normal operating parameters. Gradually, contact calls begin to pass between scattered herd members, soft whickers and gentle nickers that serve to re-establish the social bonds temporarily shattered by the explosive necessity of individual survival. These sounds carry comfort and reassurance, confirming that escape was collective rather than individual, that the herd remains intact despite the violent disruption of its peaceful afternoon routine. Kessie's voice rises above the others, her deep contralto carrying the authority of successful leadership through crisis. Her call triggers responses from every member of the group, a vocal roll call that confirms survival and begins the process of psychological recovery. The sound of her voice provides an anchor point around which shattered nerves can begin to coalesce back into normal awareness. The taste of dust and exertion fills my mouth, gritty particles stirred up by our desperate flight mixing with the metallic flavor of adrenaline and overworked muscles. Saliva has become precious, rationed by a body that has diverted every available resource toward the muscles and cardiovascular system needed for escape. The simple act of swallowing requires conscious effort, basic bodily functions slowly resuming as the crisis chemicals begin to clear from my bloodstream. My legs tremble with the aftermath of maximum effort, muscles twitching as they process the accumulated toxins of anaerobic respiration. Lactic acid burns through muscle fibers that were asked to perform beyond their normal capacity, creating sensations that hover between pain and profound fatigue. Each step requires conscious attention as my body relearns how to move at normal speeds after the desperate efficiency of escape. The cheetah has disappeared into the heat haze, its spotted form melting back into the landscape from which it materialized. Only the churned earth and scattered grass mark the path of its charge, physical evidence of how close death came before being turned aside by speed and luck. The predator will rest now, recovering from its failed hunt while calculating when and where to attempt another strike. Slowly, cautiously, the herd begins to compress back into its normal configuration. Individual zebras emerge from their scattered positions, moving with the careful steps of creatures whose nervous systems remain primed for instant flight. Each animal undergoes its own process of verification, testing legs and lungs and heart to ensure that the machinery of survival remains functional after being pushed to its limits. A subtle head count occurs without conscious planning, each zebra automatically noting the presence of familiar individuals while scanning for signs of injury or distress among the group. The mathematics of survival demand accurate assessment of the herd's condition before normal activities can resume. Missing members would require searching, injured ones would need protection, but our visual census reveals 43 survivors intact and functional. The afternoon sun continues its relentless assault, but the heat seems less oppressive after the life and death intensity of the chase. Physical discomfort pales beside the profound relief of continued existence, the simple miracle of hearts still beating and lungs still processing air. Temperature becomes merely another challenge to endure, rather than the overwhelming burden it seemed during the peaceful hours before the attack. Young Django approaches the main group with hesitant steps, his newfound understanding of vulnerability showing in every movement. The confidence of youth has been tempered by direct experience of mortality, creating the careful awareness that marks the transition from juvenile to adult thinking. His survival has been educational in ways that no amount of observation could achieve. Gradually, normal behaviors begin to reassert themselves as adrenaline levels drop and baseline physiology resumes control. Tails swish at flies that seem insignificant after facing the ultimate predator. Ears resume their constant swiveling, monitoring for threats that feel distant and manageable compared to the immediate terror of the cheetah's charge. The nervous system slowly dials down from maximum alertness to sustainable vigilance. The dust raised by our escape settles slowly in the still air, creating a temporary haze that softens the harsh lines of the landscape. Golden particles drift like pollen, catching afternoon light and creating brief moments of beauty from the chaos of survival. The scene transforms from battleground back to grazing ground, nature's indifference allowing beauty to coexist with violence. Mutual grooming begins spontaneously between pairs of zebras, the social bonding behavior serving to reinforce group cohesion after the stress of collective flight. Gentle nibbling and careful attention to hard-to-reach spots provide both physical comfort and psychological reassurance, confirming that social bonds remain intact despite the disruption of the chase. The sound of normal breathing gradually replaces the harsh panting of recovery. 43 respiratory systems finding their individual rhythms after the synchronized gasping of maximum exertion. The simple act of breathing without conscious effort feels like luxury after minutes spent forcing air through lungs operating at their absolute capacity. Far in the distance, other herds continue their own daily routines, unaware of the drama that has played out in our small section of the vast savanna. Life continues its ancient patterns despite the local interruption of predator and prey, the greater rhythm of the plains absorbing individual crises into the larger flow of existence that has characterized this landscape for millions of years. Salt Lick Pilgrimage. The evening light casts long shadows across the landscape as we begin the trek toward the salt pan, driven by cravings that go deeper than hunger or thirst. Our bodies have been depleted by the stress of the day, the minerals lost through sweat and exertion, creating a chemical hunger that can only be satisfied by the crystalline deposits that wait in the depression 2 kilometers away. This is pilgrimage in its most elemental form, the journey toward restoration guided by instincts older than consciousness. The path to the Salt Lick follows ancient routes worn smooth by countless generations of hooves, a highway of necessity that connects scattered grazing grounds to the mineral deposits essential for survival. Every large herbivore for 50 kilometers knows these paths, and the convergence of trails creates a network of communication that speaks to the fundamental importance of this resource in the harsh arithmetic of savanna life. My nostrils detect the first traces of salt-tinged air while we are still more than a kilometer away, the distinctive chemical signature carrying on the evening breeze like a promise of relief. The scent triggers responses coded deep in my nervous system, producing the same anticipation that water brings to a thirsty animal. Salt is survival, distilled to its chemical essence, the mineral foundation upon which life builds its complex architectures. The terrain changes as we approach the pan, becoming harder and more alkaline with each step. The soil here has been altered by centuries of evaporation and mineral concentration, creating a unique microenvironment that supports different plants and different insects than the surrounding grassland. Scraggly bushes, tolerant of high salinity, dot the landscape, their twisted forms speaking of adaptation to conditions that would kill ordinary vegetation. Other species have already claimed their positions at the lick when we arrive, the complex hierarchy of mineral rights playing out according to rules established through countless seasons of negotiation and conflict. A small herd of buffalo occupies the prime position near the center of the pan, their massive bulk and aggressive reputation earning them priority access to the purest deposits. We must wait our turn, with the patience of creatures who understand that salt politics can be as dangerous as water politics. The salt pan itself stretches across nearly an acre of white-crusted earth, the surface broken by the countless tongues and hooves that have worked to extract the precious minerals from the crystalline matrix. The deposits vary in purity and accessibility, with the choicest spots claimed by whoever possesses the size or aggression to hold them against competitors. Everything here operates according to the brutal mathematics of might and need. A family of elephants works methodically at the eastern edge of the pan, using their trunks to break away chunks of salt-rich earth that they consume with obvious satisfaction. Their massive feet have carved deep impressions in the softer areas, creating small pools where mineral-rich water collects during the rainy season. These giants command respect from every other species, their presence ensuring a zone of safety around their chosen feeding area. Young warthogs dart between the legs of larger animals, snatching quick tastes of salt before retreating to safety. Their strategy relies on speed and opportunism, accepting the minimal nutrition of hasty feeding in exchange for avoiding direct competition with creatures many times their size. It is a viable approach for small animals in a world dominated by the large and aggressive. The buffalo finish their feeding and lumber away with the satisfied gait of creatures whose mineral needs have been met. Their departure signals opportunity for the next tier in the hierarchy, but approach must still be managed carefully. Even departed buffalo can return quickly if they perceive encroachment on territory they have not fully relinquished. Kessie leads our approach with the measured steps of experience, her scarred hide testament to previous encounters at mineral licks, where desperation can override normal caution. She knows which areas offer the best salt content, which approaches minimize conflict with other species, which times of day bring the highest risk of territorial disputes. Her knowledge represents decades of successful navigation through one of the most politically complex environments on the savanna. The first taste of salt explodes across my tongue with an intensity that makes my mouth water immediately. The crystals dissolve into concentrated brine that my body recognizes as precisely what it needs to restore the chemical balance disrupted by stress and exertion. Each lick provides not just minerals but information about the composition and purity of the deposit, my senses automatically evaluating quality and adjusting consumption accordingly. The salt here contains more than simple sodium chloride, carrying traces of dozens of minerals leached from the surrounding landscape over geological time. Calcium and magnesium, potassium and phosphorus, iron and zinc, all the essential elements that bodies need but cannot manufacture. This natural pharmacy provides supplements that enable survival in an environment where every resource must be efficiently utilized. A mixed herd of Thompson's gazelles and impala work the periphery of the pan, their smaller size and quick reflexes allowing them to exploit areas that larger animals find difficult to access. Their presence adds another layer to the complex social dynamics of the lick, creating opportunities for both cooperation and competition as different species pursue the same essential resource. The evening light catches the salt crystals, creating tiny flashes of reflected brilliance that transform the utilitarian landscape into something approaching beauty. Each crystal represents eons of evaporation and concentration, the slow geological processes that transform seawater into terrestrial treasure. The deposits speak of ancient oceans and changing climates, of the deep time that underlies all immediate concerns with survival. My body guides the feeding process through sensations and cravings that operate below the level of conscious thought. When sodium levels reach optimal, the taste becomes less appealing, signaling time to seek different minerals. When calcium needs are met, the craving shifts toward potassium-rich areas. This internal guidance system has been refined through millions of years of evolution to maximize nutritional efficiency. The sound of licking and chewing creates its own rhythm as dozens of tongues work against crystalline surfaces, a percussion of consumption that speaks to the universal need for these deposits. Large animals create deeper sounds, their powerful jaws capable of breaking away substantial chunks, while smaller creatures produce the delicate scraping of careful extraction. The symphony of mineral consumption continues from dawn to dusk throughout the year. Territorial displays occasionally interrupt the feeding as different species test boundaries and assert claims to prime locations. A brief standoff between zebra stallions and buffalo calves resolves without violence, both sides recognizing that the resource is too valuable to risk injury over temporary access rights. Wisdom usually prevails over aggression in places where mutual need creates temporary truces. The dust raised by constant activity settles slowly in the still evening air, creating a fine haze that carries the scent of minerals and the musk of many species. This chemical signature can be detected for kilometers downwind, serving as a beacon that guides other animals toward the essential resource. The salt lick functions as a natural gathering point, a neutral territory where predator and prey often share space under the protection of mutual need. As darkness approaches, the evening feeding reaches its peak intensity. Night brings different dangers and different opportunities, but also the cool temperatures that make extended exertion possible. The pilgrimage to the salt lick represents one of the few activities that draws creatures from their defensive positions after dark, testament to the fundamental importance of these mineral deposits in the complex chemistry of survival. Twilight courtship signals. The sky transforms into a canvas of rose and amber as the sun descends toward the horizon, painting the world in colors that speak of endings and beginnings, of the eternal cycle that drives all life on the plains. This is the hour when survival needs yield briefly to the imperative of reproduction, when the harsh mathematics of staying alive expand to include the complex negotiations that ensure the continuation of the species. The air itself seems charged with possibility, as bodies that have spent the day focused on mere existence begin to respond to deeper drives. A stallion's squeal cuts through the evening calm, a sound that combines challenge and invitation in frequencies designed to carry across vast distances. The call announces his presence to potential mates and rivals alike, a vocal advertisement that proclaims his fitness and availability to any mare within hearing range. His neck arches with the tension of barely controlled power, muscles defined beneath a coat darkened by the day's exertions, yet still magnificent in the golden light. The stallion's movements become a dance of demonstration, each step calculated to display the strength and coordination that would make him a valuable genetic partner. His tail flags high, a banner of confidence that catches the evening breeze and creates its own drama against the painted sky. The display is both beautiful and functional, an honest signal of physical condition that allows potential mates to evaluate his worth without the need for physical testing. 3 mares graze within sight of his performance, their apparent indifference masking the careful evaluation that will determine the genetic future of the herd. Each mare possesses her own criteria for mate selection, preferences shaped by evolution to identify males capable of producing offspring with the best chances of survival. Beauty matters less than health, aggression less than intelligence, flash less than the subtle indicators of genetic quality that experienced females know how to read. The lead mare, Asha, lifts her head to observe the stallion's display with eyes that have seen many such performances over her 8 years of life. Her evaluation goes beyond the obvious signals of strength and vitality to include subtler indicators of genetic fitness. The symmetry of his markings, the clarity of his coat, the efficiency of his movements, all provide information about the quality of genes he might contribute to potential offspring. Another stallion appears on the horizon, drawn by the sounds of courtship to investigate this potential challenge to his own reproductive opportunities. His approach creates immediate tension, transforming the peaceful courtship display into something approaching confrontation. The evening air fills with the electricity of male competition, the ancient contest that has shaped the genetics of every successful species through countless generations of trial and selection. The two stallions circle each other with the measured steps of warriors evaluating opponents, each seeking advantages in position and timing, while avoiding the commitment to actual combat. Their necks arch and their nostrils flare, reading chemical messages that provide information about age, health, and fighting experience. The dance of dominance plays out according to rules written in hormone and instinct, rituals older than consciousness. Squeals and snorts punctuate the circling, as each male tests the other's resolve, without committing to the violence that could leave both injured and vulnerable to predators. Their hooves strike the ground in deliberate patterns, creating percussion that speaks of controlled power, ready to explode into action. The sound carries across the plain, advertising the contest to any creature within hearing range, and adding another layer to the complex social dynamics of evening courtship. The mares watch this display with the critical attention of consumers evaluating competing products, their reproductive future depending on the wisdom of their choice. Victory in these contests does not always go to the largest or most aggressive male, but often to the one who demonstrates the best combination of strength, intelligence, and stamina. Females have evolved to recognize these qualities because their offspring's survival depends on inheriting the right mix of traits. Asha moves closer to the contestants, her presence adding weight to the proceedings and increasing the stakes for both males. Her approach signals genuine interest rather than mere curiosity, transforming the theoretical contest into something with immediate practical consequences. The stallions' displays intensify in response, their movements becoming more dramatic as they compete for the attention of a female whose approval could lead to mating rights. The scent of pheromones fills the evening air, chemical messages that convey information about reproductive status and genetic compatibility. These airborne signals operate below the level of conscious detection yet influence behavior in profound ways, creating attractions and repulsions that shape mating decisions according to biological imperatives that prioritize genetic diversity and hybrid vigor. A younger mare approaches the periphery of the courtship area, her movements showing the uncertainty of an animal experiencing her first breeding season. Her inexperience contrasts sharply with Asha's confident evaluation of the competing males, highlighting the learning curve that all animals must navigate as they transition from survival-focused juveniles to reproductively active adults. The contest between stallions reaches its climax as one male demonstrates superior stamina and coordination through a series of increasingly complex displays. His opponent, recognizing the futility of further competition, withdraws with the dignity of a warrior who has fought honorably but accepted defeat. The hierarchy has been established without bloodshed, allowing both animals to survive and seek other opportunities for reproductive success. Victorious, but not yet successful, the dominant stallion now faces the more complex challenge of gaining actual acceptance from the females he has impressed through combat. Mares retain ultimate control over mating decisions, their approval requiring courtship behaviors that demonstrate gentleness and compatibility rather than mere strength. The transition from warrior to suitor requires entirely different skills and sensitivities. Asha's body language begins to signal receptivity, subtle changes in posture and movement that indicate the stallion's displays have achieved their intended effect. Her acceptance represents the culmination of complex evolutionary calculations that weigh genetic quality against practical considerations of timing and safety. The decision to mate carries enormous consequences for both animals, binding their genetic futures together in offspring who will face their own survival challenges. The other mares disperse gradually as the evening courtship reaches its conclusion, their own reproductive cycles operating on different schedules that will bring their own opportunities for mate selection and genetic investment. Each female carries her own criteria and preferences, ensuring that the gene pool remains diverse and adaptable to whatever challenges the future might bring. As full darkness approaches, the intensity of courtship activity begins to wane, replaced by the more immediate concerns of nighttime survival. The romantic interlude of twilight gives way to the practical necessities of staying alive through the dangerous hours when predators hunt and visibility becomes limited. Love must yield to survival, though the genetic future of the species has been advanced through the ancient rituals of selection and acceptance. Moonrise and night watch. The moon rises like a pale sentinel above the eastern horizon, casting silver light across a landscape transformed by darkness into something alien and mysterious. Shadows pool in depression and stretch across rises, creating a topography of light and dark that requires new techniques of navigation and evaluation. This is the hour when the plains belong to different masters, when creatures of the day must yield territory to those adapted for hunting in darkness. The herd settles into the loose formation that has evolved to maximize both rest and security during the vulnerable hours of night. We do not sleep as humans sleep, surrendering consciousness completely to dreams and rest. Instead, we enter a state of standing drowse, bodies supported by locked leg joints, while minds maintain the minimal awareness necessary to detect approaching danger. This twilight consciousness allows recovery, while preserving the quick reflexes that keep nocturnal predators at bay. Individual zebras take turns at deeper rest, while others maintain active vigilance, creating a rotation system that ensures at least a third of the herd remains fully alert at any given moment. The watchers position themselves at strategic points around the resting group, their enhanced night vision scanning constantly for movement that might indicate stalking predators. This division of labor allows the herd to function as a single organism with multiple sets of eyes and ears. My own position in the sleeping formation places me between two experienced mares whose proven alertness creates a zone of relative safety. Their presence allows me to enter the deeper stages of rest that muscle recovery requires, while trusting in their vigilance to provide warning of any approaching threat. This social cooperation represents one of the fundamental advantages of herd living, the multiplication of individual awareness into collective security. The sounds of night emerge gradually, as day-active creatures yield the acoustic environment to those adapted for darkness. The distant call of a spotted hyena echoes across the plains, its rising laugh-like cry sending automatic shivers through every prey animal within hearing range. The sound speaks of intelligence and persistence, of predators who hunt in packs and possess the patience to wait for opportunity rather than creating it through direct assault. Somewhere in the darkness, a leopard coughs, its sawing call designed to establish territory and warn competitors away from prime hunting grounds. The sound carries differently in night air, seeming to come from multiple directions simultaneously as it echoes off unseen obstacles. Each repetition provides information about the cat's location and movement, data that alerts zebras file away for future reference about predator patterns in this area. The night breeze carries scents that daylight never reveals, chemical messages from creatures who emerge only after sunset to pursue their own survival strategies. The musky odor of bat-eared foxes hunting insects, the sharp scent of genets stalking through acacia branches, the distinctive smell of aardvarks excavating termite mounds. Each scent adds to the complex olfactory map that helps navigate the social and territorial landscape of darkness. Django struggles with the transition to night alertness, his young nervous system not yet fully adapted to the different rhythms required for nocturnal survival. His movements are restless, his breathing irregular, showing the difficulty that inexperienced animals face when learning to rest without relaxing vigilance. The skill of productive night rest must be developed through practice, refined through seasons of successful survival. Casey demonstrates the perfect balance between rest and alertness that comes with decades of night survival. Her breathing remains deep and regular, while her ears continue their constant movement, monitoring the acoustic environment for changes that might indicate developing threats. Her example provides a template for younger animals learning to navigate the complex demands of staying safe while allowing their bodies the recovery that daytime exertions require. The moon climbs higher, its increasing brightness revealing details of the landscape that remain hidden during the darkest hours. Acacia trees emerge from shadow as recognizable landmarks, their familiar shapes providing orientation points in a world where visual navigation becomes challenging. The interplay between moonlight and shadow creates a constantly shifting pattern that requires constant reinterpretation. A nightjar calls from somewhere in the grass, its liquid notes adding melody to the harsher sounds of larger night creatures. The bird's presence indicates areas where insects remain active, zones that might attract other creatures seeking food or water. Everything in the night ecosystem connects to everything else, creating webs of interaction that alert animals learn to read and interpret. Far in the distance, the trumpeting of elephants carries on the night air, their calls maintaining contact across the vast distances. These giants travel in their eternal search for food and water. The sounds provide information about elephant movement patterns that could affect water access and grazing rights in areas where these massive creatures command absolute priority through size and strength. Lions begin their evening hunting with contact calls that chill the blood of every prey animal within 10 kilometers. The deep roars establish pride territory and coordinate hunting strategy, each call precisely timed to maximize both communication efficiency and psychological impact on potential prey. The sound transforms peaceful night into hunting time, elevating every prey animal's alertness to maximum levels. My standing rest position allows instant transition from drowse to full flight if circumstances demand immediate action. The locked joints that support my body weight can unlock in milliseconds, transforming static stability into explosive motion without the delay that lying down would require. This compromise between rest and readiness represents millions of years of evolutionary refinement in the art of staying alive. The night air carries its own temperature patterns, creating thermal currents that affect how sound travels and how scent disperses. Cool air settles in depressions while warm air rises from sun-heated rocks and soil, creating a three-dimensional map of temperature variation that influences predator hunting patterns and prey detection strategies. Understanding these thermal dynamics becomes crucial for survival in the complex physics of night hunting. Gradually, the deepest part of night gives way to the earliest hints of dawn, the sky lightening imperceptibly as another day begins its approach. The night watch has been successful, 43 zebras having survived the dangerous hours when darkness provides cover for those who hunt the unwary. Each successful night represents victory in the ancient contest between predator and prey, another day earned through vigilance and wisdom. The transition from night to day brings its own vulnerabilities as creatures adapted for darkness seek shelter, while day-active predators begin to stir. This changing of the guard requires careful timing and positioning, ensuring that the herd maintains security through the critical minutes when night vision gives way to day sight and different threats replace familiar dangers. Dry season dawn. The sun rises over a landscape transformed by months without rain, its golden light revealing a world stripped to its essential bones. Where green grass once waved in morning breezes, now only brown stubble remains, each blade dried to the consistency of straw and offering minimal nutrition to the creatures who must somehow extract survival from this harsh reality. The very air tastes of dust and desiccation, carrying the chemical signature of a land pushed to the edge of its ability to support life. My nostrils flare against the irritation of fine particles that hang constantly in the atmosphere during these lean months, each breath drawing in not just oxygen, but the microscopic debris of a dying landscape. The dust coats everything with a layer of brown that mutes colors and softens edges, creating a world where visibility becomes limited and breathing requires conscious effort to filter out the airborne earth. The sparse vegetation crunches beneath my hooves with sounds like breaking bones, each step creating small explosions of dried matter that speaks to the profound transformation wrought by the absence of water. What once yielded softly to pressure now resists with the brittleness of material pushed beyond its elastic limits. Even walking becomes more difficult when the ground offers no cushioning and every surface has been baked to ceramic hardness. Scattered across the plain, the remains of last season's abundance lie like archaeological evidence of better times. Dried stems and empty seed pods mark where lush growth once provided easy feeding, now reduced to skeletal reminders of the cyclical nature of abundance and scarcity that defines life in this demanding environment. The landscape has become a museum of its own former fertility. The morning sun strikes with immediate intensity, its heat building rapidly in air too dry to provide the evaporative cooling that makes hot weather bearable. By mid-morning, the temperature will climb past 40 degrees, creating conditions that push every warm-blooded creature to the limits of thermal tolerance. The day will become an endurance contest between biological cooling systems and an environment determined to exceed them. Water has become the organizing principle around which all other activities must arrange themselves. The trek to the river now requires most of the morning, a journey that once took less than an hour, having expanded into a major expedition through increasingly barren terrain. Each step toward water must be balanced against the energy expenditure required to reach it and return, the brutal mathematics of survival reduced to calculations of distance versus dehydration. My body has adapted to the scarcity through mechanisms refined over countless dry seasons, systems that conserve every drop of moisture while extracting maximum nutrition from minimal food sources. Saliva becomes precious, rationed by instincts that understand the delicate balance between the water needed for digestion and the water required for basic cellular function. Even breathing must be managed to minimize moisture loss through exhalation. The herd moves with the economical efficiency of creatures who understand that energy wasted now cannot be recovered later when resources become even scarcer. Each movement serves multiple purposes. Each decision weighs immediate needs against future consequences. The playful behaviors of the wet season have vanished, replaced by the focused intensity of animals operating within narrow margins of survival. Django's ribs have become visible beneath a coat that has lost the sleek gloss of adequate nutrition, his young body learning hard lessons about the cyclical nature of plenty and want. His inexperience shows in movements that waste energy and decisions that prioritize short-term comfort over long-term survival strategy. The dry season teaches efficiency to those who survive its lessons and eliminates those who fail to learn quickly enough. Kessie demonstrates the wisdom accumulated through 30 dry seasons, her scarred body moving with the measured pace of experience that knows exactly how much energy to expend and when to conserve strength for more critical needs. Her leadership becomes even more valuable during these challenging months. Her knowledge of hidden water sources and emergency feeding areas representing the difference between survival and starvation for the entire herd. The dust devils that dance across the plain speak of the thermal violence that builds as the sun climbs higher, miniature tornadoes born from the collision between superheated ground and the cooler air above. They move with erratic purpose across the barren landscape, lifting debris and creating brief moments of chaos before dissipating as suddenly as they formed. Their presence warns of the punishing heat that will soon make any movement a test of endurance. Insects have largely disappeared, leaving behind only the hardiest species adapted to survive months without the moisture that supports most arthropod life. The absence of their constant buzzing creates an eerie silence that speaks to the profound disruption of normal ecological relationships. Even the parasites that once plagued us have retreated, waiting in dormant stages for the return of conditions that support active feeding. The morning feeding becomes an exercise in extracting nutrition from sources that would have been ignored during times of abundance. Bark stripped from acacia trees, roots excavated from increasingly hard soil, any organic matter that might contain calories becomes fair game in the desperate chemistry of survival. Dietary standards established during good times must yield to the reality of whatever sustenance the landscape can provide. My mouth works constantly to process the fibrous, low-quality forage that represents the only available nutrition, jaws grinding with mechanical persistence to break down material that resists digestion. The effort required to extract calories from such poor food sources creates its own energy deficit, forcing careful calculation of whether the nutritional benefit justifies the metabolic cost of consumption. The horizon shimmers with heat mirages, even in the early morning, creating false lakes and impossible reflections that mock the thirst of creatures who have learned not to trust what their eyes report. These optical illusions become more pronounced as the day progresses, transforming the landscape into a realm where reality and hallucination blur together in the thermal distortions created by extreme heat. Water sources that flowed freely during the wet season have become memories marked only by cracked mud and the bones of animals who arrived too late to benefit from their life-giving flow. The geography of survival has contracted dramatically, concentrating all life around the few permanent sources that continue to provide the element essential for existence. Competition for access to these remaining resources intensifies with each day that passes without rain. Scorched earth march. The ground beneath our hooves has transformed into a mosaic of cracked earth, each polygon of dried mud separated from its neighbors by fissures deep enough to trap an unwary hoof. The soil cracks with sounds like breaking pottery as we pass, the earth itself crying out against the punishment of months without moisture. Each step requires careful placement to avoid the gaps that could spell disaster for an animal whose survival depends on the integrity of legs and hooves. The march toward distant water sources has become the central organizing principle of existence, a daily pilgrimage that consumes increasing amounts of time and energy as the reliable sources fail one by one. What began as short walks to convenient streams has evolved into epic journeys across landscapes that seem determined to test the limits of endurance. The horizon shimmers with false promises, while the reality beneath our feet speaks only of hardship and scarcity. Mirages dance across the superheated plain with increasing frequency, creating phantom lakes that appear and vanish according to the whims of thermal currents and atmospheric pressure. These optical illusions become more elaborate as the temperature climbs, sometimes creating entire landscapes of impossible beauty floating above the harsh reality of cracked earth and withered vegetation. The mind, stressed by heat and dehydration, becomes increasingly susceptible to these visual lies. My hooves strike the hardened surface with percussive force that sends shock waves up through legs and spine, each impact a reminder of how dramatically the world has changed since the last rains fell. The earth has become armor, protecting whatever moisture remains in the deeper layers, while presenting an almost impenetrable barrier to any creature hoping to extract sustenance from its depths. Even the act of walking becomes more difficult when every surface has been transformed into something approaching stone. The synchronized footfalls of the herd create their own rhythm, a percussion section of survival that speaks to the solidarity found in shared hardship. 43 sets of hooves striking baked earth in rough unison, creating a drumbeat that carries across the empty landscape like a message of persistence in the face of overwhelming challenge. The sound becomes hypnotic, a metronomic reminder that forward motion represents the only viable response to environmental extremity. Dust clouds rise with each step, fine particles lifted by the impact of hooves on ground, so dry it has lost all cohesion. The dust hangs in the still air like smoke from some vast fire, creating a haze that further reduces visibility and adds another layer of difficulty to the already challenging task of navigation across featureless terrain. Breathing becomes an exercise in filtering airborne earth from the oxygen our bodies desperately need. The heat builds with each hour of the march, rising from the ground in visible waves that distort everything beyond a few hundred meters. The superheated air creates its own weather system, generating thermal currents that lift debris and create miniature dust devils that dance across our path like demons, celebrating the success of their drought magic. Everything shimmers and wavers, reality becoming fluid in the face of temperatures that exceed the tolerance of most living systems. Django struggles with the pace, his inexperience showing in the way he wastes energy fighting the terrain rather than accepting its challenges and adapting his movements accordingly. His young body has not yet learned the efficient gaits that conserve strength over long distances, nor has he developed the mental toughness required to maintain forward motion when every step brings discomfort and every breath tastes of failure. Casey sets the pace with the wisdom of 3 decades spent navigating the extremes that define life on the African plains. Her movements show the economical efficiency of an animal that has learned to extract maximum progress from minimum effort, each step calculated to cover ground while preserving strength for the challenges that lie ahead. Her example provides a template for survival that the younger animals study with the intensity of students whose final examination could determine whether they live or die. The vegetation we pass has been reduced to its most essential elements, everything non-critical stripped away by the relentless pressure of drought. Acacia trees stand leafless, their thorny branches reaching toward a sky that offers no relief, while the grasses have retreated entirely underground, leaving only root systems to wait for the return of conditions that support surface growth. The landscape has become a study in minimalism, life pared down to its absolute necessities. Wildlife sightings become increasingly rare as the march progresses, most species having retreated to whatever refugia still offer the resources necessary for survival. The few animals we encounter move with the same grim determination that drives our own journey, fellow travelers in a landscape that has temporarily forgotten how to support the abundance that characterizes better times. We acknowledge each other with the respectful distance of competitors who understand that cooperation and competition must be carefully balanced when resources become scarce. The sun reaches its zenith, transforming the sky into a dome of white fire that presses down on everything beneath it with almost physical force. The heat becomes a living thing, an aggressive presence that seems determined to extract every drop of moisture from any organism foolish enough to venture into its domain. Survival becomes a moment-by-moment negotiation between the body's cooling systems and an environment that seems designed to overwhelm them. Water becomes not just a destination but an obsession, the organizing principle around which every thought and action must arrange itself. The memory of cool liquid flowing over parched tongues drives the march forward when rational thought might counsel rest and conservation of energy. Yet experience teaches that stopping means dying, that forward motion toward water represents the only viable strategy when the alternative is surrender to the remorseless arithmetic of dehydration. My body has adapted to the crisis through mechanisms I do not understand, but trust completely, internal systems that ration moisture and extract nutrients from sources that would have been rejected during times of plenty. Every biological process has been streamlined for efficiency, every unnecessary function temporarily suspended to focus resources on the essential task of maintaining life until better conditions return. The solidarity of shared hardship bonds the herd together with stronger ties than any experience during easier times. The knowledge that survival depends on collective effort rather than individual advantage creates a unity of purpose that transcends normal social hierarchies and territorial disputes. We move as a single organism driven by a single imperative: reach water before the failing reserves of life force are exhausted by the demands of this unforgiving march. The horizon offers no relief, only more of the same cracked earth stretching toward distant mountains that shimmer like mirages themselves. Yet somewhere ahead lies salvation in the form of water that has not yet surrendered to the drought, springs and rivers that continue to flow, despite the environmental catastrophe that has transformed this region into a test of survival. The march continues because stopping represents surrender, and surrender means death for creatures whose existence depends on the stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Old wounds, social bonds. The scar that runs along Casey's left flank tells a story written in the universal language of survival, a raised line of tissue that speaks of an encounter with a lioness 3 seasons past. The mark has faded from angry red to pale silver, but its presence serves as a constant reminder that every day above ground represents victory in the ancient contest between predator and prey. She wears it like a badge of honor, proof that experience and wisdom can triumph over youth and strength when the stakes are measured in heartbeats. My own body carries the accumulated evidence of 30 seasons spent navigating the dangers that define life on the African plains. A notch in my left ear, where a hyena's teeth came too close during a midnight encounter near the river. Scars on my hindquarters from a territorial dispute with a rival stallion during the previous breeding season. Each mark represents a lesson learned, a mistake that was not quite fatal, a moment when quick reflexes or good fortune made the difference between survival and becoming part of the food chain. The mutual grooming session that begins as afternoon heat reaches its peak serves purposes that go far beyond simple parasite removal. Asha's teeth work gently along my neck and shoulders, reaching areas that my own limited flexibility cannot access, while reinforcing the social bonds that hold our herd together. Her touch carries information about my health and condition while providing the physical comfort that strengthens the cooperative relationships essential for group survival. Each zebra's stripe pattern serves as a unique identifier, a natural fingerprint that allows instant recognition even at distances where other distinguishing features become invisible. The arrangement of black and white on my hide differs from every other zebra who has ever lived, creating a visual signature that serves both individual identification and collective confusion. When the herd moves together, our combined patterns create optical illusions that make it difficult for predators to single out individual targets. Django's pattern still shows the softer edges of youth, his stripes not yet achieving the sharp definition that will mark his transition to full adulthood. The gradual sharpening of these markings serves as a visual calendar, allowing experienced animals to estimate age and maturity level at a glance. His inexperience shows not just in behavior, but in the physical characteristics that mark him as still learning the skills necessary for long-term survival. The social hierarchy that governs our group operates according to rules more complex than simple dominance, incorporating factors of age, experience, reproductive status, and individual competence in various survival skills. Kessie's position as matriarch derives not from her ability to intimidate others, but from 3 decades of successful decision-making that has guided countless group members through crises that killed less capable leaders. Mutual grooming sessions provide opportunities for the exchange of information that goes beyond what vocal communication can convey. Through touch and scent, we learn about each other's health status, stress levels, and reproductive condition, while reinforcing the trust relationships that enable cooperative defense against predators. The physical intimacy of grooming creates psychological bonds that translate into coordinated action when crisis demands immediate response. The memory of water sources, migration routes, and seasonal feeding areas exists not in any individual mind, but in the collective knowledge of the herd, distributed across multiple generations of experience. Kessie carries information about drought years that occurred before my birth, while younger animals contribute knowledge of recent changes in predator patterns and human encroachment. This pooled intelligence creates a survival database more comprehensive than any individual could maintain alone. Scars serve as conversation starters among animals, whose communication systems include visual as well as vocal elements. The story of each wound becomes part of the group's collective memory, a teaching tool that helps inexperienced members understand the types of dangers they may face and the strategies that have proven successful in overcoming them. Pain becomes pedagogy, suffering transformed into wisdom that can benefit future generations. The dust bath ritual takes on additional social significance during the heat of the day, becoming a communal activity that reinforces group cohesion while addressing individual needs for parasite control and temperature regulation. Multiple zebras rolling in the same dust wallow create clouds of particles that provide temporary relief from biting insects, while creating opportunities for social interaction and mutual assistance. Young animals learn the locations of the best dust wallows through observation and imitation, following their elders to sites that have been used by countless generations of zebras. The knowledge of where to find the finest, most effective dust becomes part of the cultural inheritance passed down through behavioral example rather than explicit instruction. Location intelligence proves as valuable as any other survival skill. The coordination required for effective mutual grooming demonstrates the sophisticated communication systems that have evolved to support cooperative behavior. Partners adjust their movements to provide access to different areas while avoiding sensitive spots that might trigger defensive reactions. The dance of reciprocal assistance requires trust, timing, and the ability to read subtle signals that indicate comfort or discomfort. Territorial memories embedded in the landscape guide our movements through areas where previous generations have established safe routes and identified potential hazards. The paths we follow were not chosen randomly, but represent the accumulated wisdom of countless zebras who tested different approaches and survived to pass on their knowledge. Every bend and shortcut has been purchased with the lives of animals who chose less optimal routes. The reinforcement of individual recognition through visual, vocal, and olfactory cues creates a social network that enables rapid coordination during emergencies. When Casey issues an alarm call, every member of the herd immediately identifies the source and evaluates the level of threat based on their knowledge of her reliability and judgment. Trust relationships built through countless minor interactions become life-saving resources when seconds determine outcomes. Social grooming provides stress relief that has measurable physiological benefits, reducing cortisol levels and promoting the production of endorphins that help animals cope with the constant pressure of survival in a demanding environment. The physical pleasure of careful attention to itchy or irritated areas creates positive associations that strengthen group bonds and encourage continued cooperation. The teaching of essential skills occurs through observation and imitation, rather than formal instruction, with experienced animals demonstrating proper techniques while younger ones practice and refine their abilities. Django learns the most efficient grazing patterns by watching Casey's feeding behavior, gradually incorporating her strategies into his own developing skill set. Education happens through proximity and attention, rather than explicit pedagogy. The scars we carry become part of our identity, distinguishing marks that help others track our individual histories and evaluate our experience levels. Animals with multiple scars may be seen as either battle-tested survivors or unlucky individuals prone to poor decision-making. The interpretation depends on the observer's ability to read the stories told by the position, age, and circumstances of each wound. Lion ambush at dusk. The tall grass holds secrets in its golden depths, each blade a potential screen for death waiting in perfect stillness. The evening light creates a maze of shadows and highlights that confuse the eye and provide perfect camouflage for predators whose survival depends on the art of invisible approach. Every tuft of vegetation could conceal a crouched form. Every patch of shadow might hide eyes that calculate distance and timing with the precision of natural killing machines. The first sign of danger comes not through sight but through the subtle wrongness that experienced prey animals learn to recognize. An absence of sound where sound should be. A quality of stillness that speaks of predators holding their breath while they position themselves for the strike. The normal evening chorus of insects and small birds has fallen silent in a circle of fear that radiates outward from the hidden threat, like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. My nostrils flare against air that carries the faintest trace of lion musk, a scent so diluted by distance and wind that it barely registers at the conscious level, yet triggers every alarm system that evolution has refined through millions of years of predator-prey interaction. The chemical signature speaks of death held in suspension, of hunger and patience combined with the physical tools necessary to transform herbivore into meat. Kessie's head rises first, her scarred muzzle testing the evening breeze with quick, shallow breaths that seek confirmation of what her instincts have already recognized. Her ears swivel with mechanical precision, reading the acoustic environment for the telltale absence of normal sounds that indicates predator presence. 30 seasons of survival have taught her to trust the subtle warnings that separate the living from the dead. The silence spreads through the herd like infection, 43 sets of eyes and ears suddenly focused on threats that exist more as absence than presence. We stand frozen in the tableau of animals who have detected danger but not yet identified its precise location or timing. This moment of suspended animation could last seconds or minutes, depending on the patience of hunters whose success depends on perfect timing. A shadow moves wrong in the grass 60 meters away, flowing against the direction of the evening breeze, in a way that betrays the presence of something large and predatory. The movement is so subtle that it barely qualifies as motion, yet every zebra in the herd marks its position with the precision of creatures whose lives depend on detecting the undetectable. Death has announced itself through the smallest possible deviation from natural patterns. 3 lions emerge from the grass with liquid grace, their tawny forms materializing from vegetation as if conjured by the gathering darkness. They move with the coordinated precision of hunters who have worked together countless times, each cat taking a position that maximizes the group's chances of successful ambush while minimizing the prey's opportunities for escape. This is teamwork refined by hunger and perfected through practice. The largest lioness locks her yellow eyes on Django, who has drifted slightly apart from the main group in his inexperienced search for better grazing. Her choice of target demonstrates the calculating intelligence that makes social predators so effective, the ability to identify weakness and exploit vulnerability with surgical precision. Youth and inexperience have marked him for death, as surely as if he wore a sign announcing his availability. Terror floods my nervous system with chemicals designed to override normal limitations and transform ordinary zebra into escape machine. Every muscle fiber receives orders to prepare for maximum effort, while every sensory system shifts into the enhanced awareness that characterizes life or death situations. Time seems to slow as perception accelerates to process the flood of information that could determine whether the next few seconds end in survival or consumption. The lead lioness begins her charge with explosive acceleration that transforms her from motionless hunter to projectile of claws and teeth in the space between heartbeats. Her powerful hindquarters drive her forward with momentum that could bowl over a zebra half again her size, while her front paws reach out with claws extended to provide purchase on whatever flesh they encounter first. Django's flight begins a split second after the charge, his young reflexes finally responding to danger that has moved beyond subtle threat to immediate reality. His acceleration shows the desperate energy of an animal that has suddenly discovered how much it wants to live, legs pumping with coordination that his normal movements have never achieved. Fear provides the education that peaceful practice never could. The stallion nearest to the attack makes a decision that defines the difference between survival and heroism, turning toward the lioness rather than away in a desperate attempt to draw her attention from the vulnerable young male. His charge carries him directly into the path of a predator designed to kill creatures larger than himself, a sacrifice play that trades certain personal danger for the possible salvation of a herd member. The collision between stallion and lioness creates a cloud of dust and flying mane that obscures the details of their encounter, while the sounds of impact echo across the evening plain. Hooves strike against muscle and bone while claws seek purchase on hide. That offers no protection against weapons evolved specifically for penetrating such defenses. The violence happens too quickly for observation, too intensely for anything but the most basic responses. The other 2 lionesses adjust their attack patterns to account for the stallion's intervention, their hunting strategy flexible enough to accommodate unexpected variables while maintaining focus on the ultimate goal of securing meat. Their movements show the intelligence that makes pack hunters so much more dangerous than solitary predators, the ability to adapt tactics in real time while maintaining coordinated pressure on their chosen prey. Django reaches the safety of the main herd as 42 zebras close ranks around him, creating a fortress of striped flesh and defensive hooves that transforms individual vulnerability into collective strength. The psychological effect of the merge provides instant relief from the isolation that had made him such an attractive target, while the physical protection of numbers creates actual barriers between him and the pursuing death. The stallion breaks free from his encounter with the lead lioness, blood streaming from claw marks across his shoulder and neck, but still mobile and still capable of the speed that represents his only chance of survival. His gamble has paid off in time purchased rather than safety achieved, seconds that might be enough to reach the protective formation that offers his best hope of seeing another dawn. The lions maintain their pursuit for another 100 meters before the mathematics of energy expenditure forces them to acknowledge failure and break off the attack. Their breathing has become labored, their coordination slightly ragged, their perfect killing machine beginning to show the strain of chasing prey that refuses to cooperate with the natural order that places predators above herbivores in the hierarchy of consumption. The silence that follows the failed ambush feels different from the silence that preceded it, carrying the electric aftermath of violence narrowly avoided, rather than the potential energy of violence about to be unleashed. 43 zebras stand in the gathering darkness, hearts still pounding with the chemistry of maximum effort, but alive and intact, and ready to continue the ancient dance of survival that defines existence on the African plains. The wounded stallion's injury will heal, or it will not, his survival dependent on factors beyond courage and determination. The lions will seek easier prey or face the consequences of continued failure in an environment where weakness equals death for predator as surely as for prey. Another day ends with the score sheet of survival marked by narrow margins and split-second decisions that separate the living from the dead. Star-painted silence. The night has reached its deepest hour, when darkness achieves a completeness that transforms the world into something beyond the merely physical. Above me, the Milky Way spreads across the black dome of sky, like scattered dust from some cosmic mill, each point of light a sun burning across distances that render earthly concerns insignificant. The stars reflect in the still water of the pond beside our resting place, creating the illusion that we graze suspended between two infinite skies. In this profound quiet, my heartbeat becomes a meditation, each pulse marking time, not in the frantic rhythm of escape or the steady cadence of travel, but in the slow, contemplative tempo of a creature at peace with its place in the vast architecture of existence. The sound of my own circulation seems unnaturally loud in the cosmic silence, a reminder that life continues its ancient work even when the world appears to have stopped breathing. The water beside us holds the night sky like a mirror, doubling the universe and creating a space where reflection becomes literal as well as metaphorical. Stars above and stars below frame our small band of survivors in an envelope of infinite space, making us simultaneously insignificant specks and the center of our own observable universe. We are witnesses to eternity and participants in the brief dance of organic chemistry that we call life. No wind disturbs the surface of the pond, allowing the stellar reflection to achieve perfect clarity. Each constellation appears twice, once in its proper place among the celestial sphere, and again in the dark water that serves as nature's mirror. Orion the hunter pursues his eternal quarry across both sky and pond, while the Southern Cross marks direction in dimensions both above and below our terrestrial plane of existence. The silence carries weight, a presence rather than an absence that seems to press against my ears with the force of accumulated quiet. No insect drones, no distant roar announces hunting lions, no rustle of grass speaks of approaching danger. The world has entered a state of suspension where even the background noise of existence has been temporarily muted, leaving only the essential sounds of breathing and heartbeat to mark the passage of time. My reflection in the still water shows a creature transformed by moonlight into something ethereal, stripes rendered silver and black instead of their usual stark contrast. The zebra looking back at me from the pond's surface appears to belong more to the realm of spirits than to the harsh reality of predator and prey that defines daylight existence. In this liquid mirror, I see myself as part of something larger than survival, connected to the cosmic order that governs stars and seasons alike. The temperature has dropped to the point where breathing becomes visible. Small clouds of vapor that rise and dissipate in the still air, like offerings to the night sky. Each exhalation carries the warmth of life into the cooling darkness, brief ghosts that mark my presence in this vast emptiness before vanishing without trace. The contrast between warm body and cool air creates its own weather system in miniature. Casey stands motionless beside the water, her scarred form transformed by starlight into something approaching the mythical. The accumulated wisdom of 30 seasons seems to radiate from her stillness, as if the night has revealed her true nature as a repository of survival knowledge earned through countless encounters with death and difficulty. Her presence anchors our small group to the practical world, while the infinite sky pulls consciousness toward the cosmic. The Milky Way stretches from horizon to horizon, that river of distant suns that ancient people saw as the path souls took to reach the afterlife. Tonight it seems close enough to touch, a gossamer bridge spanning the gap between Earth and eternity. The light reaching my eyes left its sources before my ancestors were born, carrying information about a universe larger and older than any earthly concern. Young Django lies in the drowsing stance that allows rest while maintaining readiness, his breathing the slow rhythm of an animal learning to find peace within alertness. The night's profound quiet has taught him something about the difference between the active vigilance required during dangerous hours and the passive awareness that allows recovery while preserving safety. His education continues even in sleep. Somewhere in the cosmic distance, other worlds orbit other stars, perhaps hosting their own versions of the eternal dance between hunter and hunted, the cyclical drama of rain and drought, birth and death that defines existence everywhere, that life takes hold. The stars remind me that our struggles, while absolutely vital to us, represent just one tiny thread in a tapestry of existence that spans galaxies and eons. The reflection of stars in water creates a sense of floating in space, suspended between two infinite depths that meet only at the thin line where our hooves touch solid ground. This narrow margin represents the entire realm of terrestrial existence, the brief interface between cosmic immensities where matter organizes itself into forms complex enough to contemplate their own existence and marvel at the universe that created them. The night wind has stilled completely, allowing the water to achieve the perfect stillness necessary for clear reflection. In daylight, this pond serves merely as a source of hydration and a gathering place for various species seeking relief from heat. But in the profound darkness, it becomes a window into infinity, a portal that connects our small patch of African grassland to the cosmic ocean that surrounds and contains all possible worlds. The silence speaks of cycles larger than seasons, of the patient rotation of continents, and the slow dance of climate that shapes landscapes across geological time. We are temporary visitors in a story that began billions of years ago and will continue long after our species has contributed its brief chapter to the ongoing narrative of life on Earth. Yet in this moment, suspended between reflected infinities, we are also the universe contemplating itself through the medium of consciousness. Long Rain's arrival. The first scent arrives like a message from the gods, carried on a wind that has traveled across vast distances to bring news of transformation. Petrichor fills my nostrils with the distinctive smell of rain meeting earth, that chemical signature of ozone and wet dust that triggers responses older than memory. The aroma speaks of endings and beginnings, of the death of the dry season and the resurrection of abundance that will reshape every aspect of existence on the plains. The wind itself feels different, carrying moisture that my skin recognizes even before conscious thought can process the change. Each breath draws in air that no longer tastes of dust and desperation, but carries the promise of green things growing, of pools refilling and streams beginning to flow again. The atmosphere has acquired weight and substance, transformation made tangible in the humidity that clings to my coat like a benediction. Thunder rumbles somewhere beyond the horizon, still too distant to pose immediate threat, but close enough to announce the approach of the seasonal miracle that will save or doom every creature within hundreds of kilometers. The sound carries across impossible distances, a bass note that resonates in my chest cavity and speaks to the electromagnetic sensitivity that allows animals to detect atmospheric changes long before they become visible to human senses. The first drops arrive like advanced scouts, individual messengers that strike my hide with the cool touch of salvation. Each droplet carries the potential for transformation, containing within its molecular structure the key to unlocking the dormant life that has waited months for this moment of resurrection. The sensation of water falling from sky, rather than being desperately sought at distant sources, feels like magic returning to a world that had forgotten how to perform miracles. My throat opens in a bray of pure relief, a sound that emerges without conscious decision as my body recognizes the end of the trial that has tested every limit of endurance and survival. The call triggers responses from every member of the herd, creating a chorus of celebration that rises to meet the thunder rolling across the darkening sky. We sing the song of creatures who have survived to see another wet season, who have earned the right to abundance through months of scarcity. The rain begins in earnest, transforming from scattered drops to steady downpour that soaks through my coat and reaches the skin beneath. The sensation of being thoroughly wet feels like rebirth, every cell in my body responding to the moisture with grateful acceptance. The taste of rainwater on my tongue carries flavors of cloud and sky, pure hydration unmarked by the mineral tang of terrestrial sources or the chemical complexity of standing pools. Within hours, the landscape begins its miraculous transformation. Dormant seeds that have waited months for this moment explode into germination, sending shoots toward the surface with desperate urgency. The brown stubble of drought-stressed grass begins to show hints of green at the base, new growth emerging with the speed that only comes when life has been held in suspension and suddenly released from constraint. The air fills with the sound of celebration as creatures throughout the ecosystem respond to the return of abundance. Bird calls that have been absent during the dry months return in full chorus. Insects emerge from their dormant refugia, and somewhere in the distance, elephants trumpet their joy at the end of water shortages that have forced them to travel ever-increasing distances to slake their massive thirst. Young foals begin to appear among the scattered herds that had postponed reproduction during the harsh months, when every calorie was precious and every drop of water contested. Their mothers, who have carried the burden of pregnancy through the difficult season, finally allow themselves the luxury of birth, now that the environment can support the additional demands of nursing and protecting vulnerable young. New life emerges into a world suddenly capable of supporting it. My movements become less constrained as the psychological weight of scarcity lifts from my shoulders. The careful energy conservation that has characterized every action for months gives way to something approaching playfulness, movements that serve no purpose beyond the simple joy of possessing strength to waste. The efficiency demanded by survival yields to the luxury of inefficiency that abundance makes possible. The rhythm of our daily existence begins to shift as the geographic constraints imposed by drought-shrunken resources start to relax. No longer must we trek vast distances for minimal water or compete desperately for inadequate forage. The expansion of available resources allows the herd to spread out, to explore territories that have been inaccessible during the months when survival required concentration around the few remaining sources of life. Dust settles from the air as the rain transforms the fine particles that have plagued every breath into the foundation for new growth. The constant irritation of airborne earth gives way to the clean taste of moisture-laden air, breathing becoming a pleasure rather than a chore. My lungs expand fully for the first time in months, drawing in oxygen unmarked by the gritty presence of a landscape too dry to maintain its own cohesion. The social dynamics of the herd begin to change as the stress of survival gives way to the opportunities of abundance. Energy that has been devoted entirely to staying alive can now be redirected toward reproduction, play, and the complex social interactions that define zebra culture during good times. The harsh hierarchy of scarcity softens into the more nuanced relationships that characterize periods when resources allow for generosity and cooperation. Kessie moves with steps that show the relief of an animal no longer required to make life and death decisions about resource allocation with every choice. Her leadership remains essential, but the nature of that leadership shifts from crisis management to the guidance of abundance. Her 30 seasons of experience now serve to help the herd make the most of good times, rather than simply survive bad ones. The horizon, which has been empty and threatening for months, now promises rather than threatens. Distant storms speak of continued moisture rather than false hope, while the green haze beginning to appear on previously barren hillsides suggests that the transformation has only just begun. This is the start of a season that will remake the world, returning it to the abundance that makes life not just possible, but beautiful. Birth in the storm. Lightning illuminates the night in stark flashes that transform the familiar landscape into a theater of shadows and brilliant revelation. Thunder follows each burst of light with percussion that seems to shake the earth itself. The sky's violence creating a backdrop of elemental power for the most fundamental drama of existence. In this chaos of sound and light, life prepares to enter the world under conditions that would test the survival instincts of creatures far more experienced than those about to be born. Asha paces in the tight circle that instinct dictates, her swollen sides heaving with the dual effort of labor and the storm's electromagnetic pressure that affects every sensitive nervous system on the plains. The contractions that grip her body follow their own rhythm, independent of the thunder that crashes overhead and the rain that falls in sheets heavy enough to blur vision beyond a few meters. Her time has come regardless of weather, biology following its own imperatives without regard for atmospheric convenience. The herd forms a protective circle around the laboring mare, 42 zebras creating a living wall between vulnerability and the countless dangers that night and storm can conceal. We face outward with the automatic positioning of creatures who understand that birth represents the ultimate moment of exposure, when the attention of the entire group must focus inward while maintaining vigilance against threats that find opportunity in distraction. Rain pounds against our backs, with the force of water falling from significant height, each drop carrying the potential energy of its journey from cloud to earth. The downpour creates its own sound environment, a white noise that could mask the approach of predators, while providing the acoustic cover that might allow our defensive formation to escape detection by hunters, who rely on sound to locate prey in darkness. Between contractions, Asha's breathing matches the rhythm of the storm, deep inhalations during the brief quiet between thunderclaps, shorter pants when lightning and sound arrive together with minimal delay. Her body has synchronized with the atmospheric violence surrounding her, finding harmony between the internal pressure of birth and the external pressure of the weather system that has chosen this moment to release its accumulated energy. The scent of birth mixes with the ozone smell of electrical activity and the petrichor of rain on Earth, creating an olfactory signature that speaks simultaneously of beginnings and transformations. The chemical messages of labor hormones blend with the metallic tang of lightning and the organic richness of drought-stressed soil receiving its first substantial moisture in months. Life and weather create their own perfume, Steam rises from our rain-soaked backs as body heat meets cool water, creating small clouds of vapor that dissipate immediately in the moving air. The visual effect adds another layer to the already dramatic scene, making us appear like spirits emerging from some ethereal realm to witness this fundamental ceremony. The boundary between earth and sky seems to dissolve in the meeting of hot flesh and cold rain. The foal's appearance begins with the emergence of tiny hooves, pale and perfect, followed by the elongated muzzle that will soon learn to distinguish between the myriad scents that define survival on the African plains. The birth process accelerates despite the chaos surrounding it, evolution having designed the mechanics of reproduction to function regardless of external conditions. Life persists through its own momentum, unstoppable once set in motion. Lightning strikes somewhere close enough to make the air smell of burned atmosphere. The electromagnetic pulse followed immediately by thunder that seems to originate inside our own bodies. The foal chooses this moment of maximum chaos to complete its entrance into the world, sliding free of its mother's body as if launched by the storm's own energy into a reality of rain and wind and electrical violence. The newborn strikes the muddy ground with a soft impact that is immediately lost in the storm's cacophony, its arrival into the world unmarked by any sound that could reach beyond our protective circle. Steam rises from the tiny body as internal heat meets external cold, creating the visual effect of a creature born from mist and magic rather than the biological reality of mammalian reproduction. The foal appears to materialize from the storm itself. Asha's immediate response overrides every other consideration as she begins the ancient ritual of cleaning and bonding that will determine whether this new life survives its first critical hours. Her tongue works across the foal's hide with mechanical precision, removing birth fluids while stimulating circulation and breathing through the pressure of maternal attention. The storm rages around them, but her universe has contracted to the size of the small life that depends entirely on her care. The foal's first breath creates a visible puff of vapor in the cool air, a tiny cloud that marks the beginning of an independent respiratory system. Each subsequent breath comes more easily as lungs designed for air breathing replace the aquatic environment of the womb. The transition happens with the efficiency of biological systems that have been refined through millions of years of successful births under every conceivable condition. Within minutes, the foal attempts its first movement towards standing, driven by instincts that recognize the vulnerability of ground-level existence for prey animals. Its legs unfold with mechanical precision, despite never having been used. Genetic programming providing the motor patterns necessary for mobility from the moment of birth. The attempt fails, but the effort demonstrates the automatic drive toward independence that characterizes creatures whose survival depends on mobility. The scent imprinting that will allow mother and offspring to recognize each other among dozens of similar individuals begins immediately. Chemical bonding that creates identification more reliable than visual recognition. Asha's muzzle works across the foal's hide with systematic thoroughness, cataloging the unique scent signature that will allow her to distinguish her own young from every other foal in the herd. The process continues despite the rain that threatens to wash away the very molecules that carry this essential information. Lightning illuminates the scene in a tableau that seems designed by some cosmic artist. The protective circle of adult zebras surrounding the steam-shrouded figures of mother and newborn, while water falls from the dark sky like blessing or baptism. The image burns into memory with the intensity of moments when life reveals itself in its most essential form, stripped of pretense and reduced to the fundamental drama of survival passing from one generation to the next. The storm's violence provides an appropriate introduction to the world that awaits this new life, a place where comfort and safety must be earned through vigilance and strength, where beauty and terror exist in constant proximity. Born into chaos, the foal will learn that existence requires the ability to find stability within instability, peace within struggle, hope within a reality that offers no guarantees beyond the opportunity to try. Foal's first 24 hours. The world unfolds in stages for eyes that have never seen sunlight, reality assembling itself from fragments of light and shadow that must be decoded by a brain still learning the basic grammar of vision. The foal's first glimpse of existence beyond the womb reveals a landscape of vertical shapes that resolve gradually into legs, dozens of pillars that support bodies too large to comprehend. Each blink brings clearer focus, visual acuity, improving by the hour as neural pathways strengthen and retinal cells adapt to their new function. Standing becomes the first great victory, a triumph of will over physics that requires multiple attempts before coordination emerges from chaos. Each failure teaches lessons about balance and leverage that cannot be learned through observation alone, the education written in falls and recoveries that gradually build the confidence necessary for mobility. The foal's legs tremble with effort and inexperience, muscles learning their proper roles in the complex dance of locomotion. The taste of mother's milk provides the first nutrition designed specifically for this individual, a custom blend of proteins and fats that will fuel rapid growth while providing antibodies essential for immune system development. Each nursing session transfers not just calories but chemical protection against diseases that could prove fatal to an immune system, still learning to distinguish between self and threat. The warm liquid carries life itself in molecular form. Within hours, the foal begins to distinguish between the familiar scent of its mother and the dozens of other adults whose chemical signatures create a confusion of identity. Recognition develops through repeated exposure and positive reinforcement, the olfactory bond strengthening with each successful reunion after brief separations. This scent-based navigation system will prove essential for survival in a world where visual similarities could lead to fatal mistakes about identity and kinship. The herd's response to new life follows patterns established through countless generations of successful child rearing, creating a protective environment that maximizes the foal's chances of surviving its most vulnerable period. Adult zebras position themselves to create barriers between the newborn and potential threats, while maintaining the spacing necessary for group mobility. The social structure adapts temporarily to accommodate the needs of a member who cannot yet contribute to collective defense. Predators detect the presence of new life through senses attuned to opportunity, the chemical signature of birth, and the behavioral changes in the herd creating signals that hunting animals learn to recognize and exploit. Lions, hyenas, and wild dogs all understand that newborns represent the easiest targets, creatures whose flight responses remain undeveloped and whose mother's attention becomes divided between personal survival and offspring protection. The next few days will test every defensive strategy the herd has evolved. The foal's attempts at grazing reveal motor patterns that exist in genetic potential, but require practice to achieve efficiency. Its muzzle works clumsily at grass stems that adults crop with automatic precision, jaws learning the proper pressure and timing necessary for effective feeding. These early efforts provide little actual nutrition, but serve as essential training for the feeding techniques that will sustain life once weaning begins. Sleep comes in brief intervals between feeding and learning, the exhaustion of constant discovery requiring frequent rest periods that leave the foal vulnerable to dangers it cannot yet recognize. The herd adjusts its movement patterns to accommodate these necessary rest breaks, adults maintaining vigilance, while their newest member recuperates from the overwhelming experience of processing reality through senses still calibrating themselves to their environment. The hierarchy that governs adult interactions extends to include the foal according to rules that protect youth, while beginning the education necessary for eventual independence. Older juveniles approach with curiosity tempered by caution, learning to interact with younger animals while avoiding behaviors that might trigger protective responses from the mother. These early social contacts establish the foundation for lifelong relationships within the herd structure. Each stumble and recovery teaches lessons about balance and momentum that will prove crucial when escape becomes necessary, motor learning that happens through experience rather than instruction. The foal's coordination improves visibly from hour to hour, random movements giving way to increasingly purposeful actions as neural connections strengthen and muscle memory begins to accumulate. Every step builds the foundation for the swift flight that will eventually become its primary survival tool. The mother's protective instincts operate on multiple levels, from the immediate physical positioning that keeps her body between the foal and potential threats to the chemical communication that maintains contact, even when visual monitoring becomes impossible. Her vigilance intensifies beyond normal levels, the presence of vulnerable offspring triggering behavioral changes that increase her own risk while maximizing the newborn's chances of survival. Sounds that will become essential survival information begin to acquire meaning as the foal's auditory processing develops the ability to distinguish between neutral environmental noise and sounds that carry biological significance. The alarm calls that trigger instant flight responses in adults register as interesting auditory phenomena rather than life-saving warnings. The interpretation of sound requiring learning that can only come through experience and observation. The foal's first successful run covers only a few meters before coordination fails and balance collapses, but the attempt demonstrates the automatic drive toward mobility that characterizes prey animals whose survival depends on speed. Each effort builds muscle strength and improves the neural pathways that will eventually enable the sustained running necessary for escape from predators. The ability exists in potential, requiring only practice to achieve effectiveness. Other mothers in the herd watch the foal's development with interest that goes beyond mere curiosity, evaluating its progress as an indicator of genetic quality and maternal competence. Strong foals reflect well on both parents, while weak or clumsy offspring raise questions about genetic fitness that could influence future mating decisions. Every aspect of development becomes subject to the social evaluation that shapes breeding choices. The first 24 hours establish patterns that will govern the foal's relationship with its environment for weeks to come. Preferences and aversions that develop through early experiences with comfort and discomfort. Learning happens constantly during this critical period, each interaction with the physical and social world creating neural pathways that will influence behavior long after the specific memories fade into the background of accumulated experience. By sunset of its first day above ground, the foal has progressed from helpless newborn to mobile juvenile, capable of basic locomotion and successful nursing. The transformation represents one of nature's most remarkable achievements, the rapid development of survival capabilities in a creature whose life depends on achieving competence within days rather than weeks. The foundation has been laid for a lifetime of learning, each lesson building on the last, in an educational process that never truly ends. Teaching the stripe code. Recognition begins with the fundamental understanding that not all black and white patterns carry the same meaning, that the zebra universe contains individuals whose stripe arrangements communicate identity, status, and relationship as clearly as any spoken language. The foal's visual system gradually learns to distinguish between the dozens of similar-looking adults, developing the pattern recognition skills that will prevent potentially fatal mistakes about kinship, hierarchy, and social standing within the complex structure of herd society. Each zebra's stripe pattern serves as a unique identifier more reliable than fingerprints, the arrangement of black and white creating visual signatures that remain constant throughout life, while being subtle enough to require education for proper interpretation. The foal studies these patterns through prolonged observation, learning to associate specific markings with particular individuals whose behavior patterns provide lessons about survival strategies and social navigation. Grooming becomes the first formal education in pattern recognition, the gentle nibbling and careful attention that adults provide serving as opportunities to study stripe arrangements at close range, while building the social bonds that ensure protection during vulnerable periods. The foal learns to recognize the approach of specific individuals through their unique markings, developing preferences based on the comfort and security that particular patterns represent. The escape drill begins as play, but carries deadly serious implications for future survival. The zigzag running pattern that confuses predator targeting systems requiring precise coordination between multiple individuals whose movements must complement rather than conflict with each other. Adult zebras demonstrate the proper technique through mock charges and sudden direction changes, their stripes creating optical illusions that multiply with each additional participant. When the herd moves as a coordinated unit during escape maneuvers, the collective stripe pattern creates a visual phenomenon that overwhelms predator vision, individual animals disappearing into a moving maze of black and white that makes target selection nearly impossible. The foal learns to position itself within this living camouflage, understanding that survival depends on becoming part of a larger optical illusion rather than standing out as an individual target. Visual confusion becomes a defensive weapon when dozens of striped bodies move in close formation, their combined patterns creating a dazzling display that disrupts the visual tracking systems that predators use to single out prey. The foal practices maintaining position within this protection, while learning to read the subtle signals that coordinate group movement without vocal communication that might attract unwanted attention. Grooming etiquette follows rules as complex as any diplomatic protocol, the social hierarchy determining who may approach whom for mutual cleaning and which areas of the body may be addressed by animals of different status levels. The foal learns these boundaries through gentle correction and observation, developing an understanding of personal space that will prevent conflicts and maintain social harmony throughout its life. Older siblings serve as intermediate teachers, their recent experience with the learning process making them ideal guides for navigating the complexities of zebra social structure. These juvenile mentors demonstrate proper behavior patterns while providing protection from adults whose patience with inexperienced animals may be limited by their own survival pressures and social responsibilities. The recognition training extends beyond simple pattern memorization to include the reading of body language and behavioral cues that provide information about emotional states and intentions. The foal learns to interpret ear positions, tail movements, and posture changes that signal everything from playful mood to serious alarm, developing a vocabulary of visual communication that supplements the obvious information provided by stripe patterns. Mock battles between young zebras provide safe opportunities to practice the aggressive displays that will eventually serve defensive purposes, teaching proper technique for kicks and bites, while establishing dominance relationships that will influence social dynamics for years to come. These play fights allow the exploration of combat skills without the potentially fatal consequences of actual warfare, education disguised as entertainment. The formation flying that characterizes zebra escape behavior requires split-second timing and perfect coordination between individuals whose survival depends on their ability to function as components of a larger defensive machine. The foal learns to maintain proper spacing and respond instantly to direction changes that propagate through the group faster than conscious thought, developing reflexes that could mean the difference between life and death. Territory recognition becomes essential as the foal learns to distinguish between safe areas where the herd can relax and dangerous zones where predators commonly hunt or where territorial disputes with other herds create additional threats. The education happens through observation of adult behavior patterns, learning to read the subtle signals that indicate when vigilance must increase or when normal activities can continue. The stripe code extends to include recognition of other species whose stripe patterns serve different purposes, teaching the foal to distinguish between zebras and the occasional striped antelope, or unusual color variations that might appear in mixed herds. This identification skill prevents the confusion that could lead to following the wrong species during emergency escapes or territorial movements. Individual recognition within the family unit becomes increasingly sophisticated as the foal learns to identify not just its mother, but siblings, aunts, and other relatives whose support networks provide additional layers of protection and education. These extended family relationships create redundant safety systems that ensure survival, even if primary caregivers become unavailable through injury or death. The teaching process accelerates as the foal's cognitive abilities develop, pattern recognition improving rapidly as neural pathways strengthen and visual processing becomes more sophisticated. Each lesson builds on previous learning, creating a comprehensive education in the visual language that governs zebra society and provides the foundation for all future social and survival interactions. The graduation from student to teacher begins as the foal starts to demonstrate proper techniques to even younger animals. The transition from learning to teaching, marking important developmental milestones in the progression toward full adult status within the herd hierarchy. Knowledge passes from generation to generation through this informal but essential educational system that ensures the survival of cultural information that cannot be encoded in genes alone. Crossing the Croc River. The river runs brown and angry with seasonal flood, its surface broken by swirls and eddies that speak of powerful currents, capable of sweeping away anything foolish enough to underestimate their force. The water carries the accumulated rainfall of distant highlands, transforming what was a manageable stream during the dry season into a torrent that demands respect and careful strategy from any creature hoping to reach the other side alive. The ancient migration route has brought our herd to this crossing point that has been used by countless generations of zebras. The wisdom of ages concentrated in the knowledge that this particular bend in the river offers the best combination of manageable current and reasonable depth. Yet even here, the seasonal floods have transformed familiar terrain into something that requires new calculations of risk versus necessity. From the muddy banks, the distinctive ridged backs of crocodiles break the surface like half-submerged logs, their prehistoric eyes watching our approach with the patience of creatures who understand that desperation eventually drives prey into their domain. These armored predators have gathered here precisely because they know that migration routes create opportunities, concentrating potential meals at predictable times and locations. The stallion who has claimed leadership for this crossing moves to the water's edge with steps that combine confidence and caution, his experience in previous years' migrations providing the knowledge necessary to evaluate current conditions and timing. His decision will determine whether we attempt the crossing now or wait for better conditions, a choice that could affect the survival of every member of the herd. Kessie positions herself near the center of our formation, her 3 decades of successful river crossings making her voice crucial in the collective decision-making process that will determine our strategy. Her scarred hide carries evidence of previous encounters with both crocodiles and treacherous currents, experience that cannot be learned from observation alone, but must be earned through direct confrontation with the river's dangers. The current runs fastest in the center of the channel, where the brown water moves with enough force to bowl over an adult zebra and carry it downstream toward waiting jaws. The crossing strategy must account for this central zone of maximum danger, timing the entry and exit to minimize exposure to the strongest flow while avoiding the shallow areas where crocodiles lie in ambush. Young foals cluster near their mothers, instinctively understanding that this crossing represents a level of danger beyond anything they have previously encountered. Their inexperience with water creates additional vulnerabilities that must be compensated for through the protection and guidance of adults, whose own survival depends on successfully shepherding the entire group across the hostile environment. The lead stallion enters the water with explosive suddenness, his strategy based on speed and surprise rather than careful negotiation with the current. His powerful legs drive him toward the far bank in a straight line that minimizes time exposed to both crocodiles and current, water churning white around his pumping hooves as he demonstrates the technique that others must follow. One by one, the adult zebras launch themselves into the torrent, each choosing the moment that offers the best chance of successful crossing based on current conditions and the position of visible crocodiles. The timing requires split-second decision-making, the difference between life and death, measured in heartbeats, and the ability to read water conditions that change constantly. The current seizes each swimmer immediately, powerful flows that require constant adjustment of direction and tremendous expenditure of energy to maintain forward progress toward the distant bank. Swimming becomes a full-body effort that engages every muscle in the struggle against water that seems determined to carry its victims downstream to where larger predators wait with open jaws. A crocodile surfaces near the midpoint of the crossing, its massive head breaking water with the casual menace of a creature perfectly adapted for exactly this type of hunting opportunity. The sight triggers panic responses in animals still in the water, desperate swimming that burns energy reserves while reducing the coordination necessary for efficient progress against the current. The young foal that entered the water moments before the crocodile's appearance struggles against a current too strong for its inexperienced swimming technique, small legs pumping frantically as the flow carries it toward the waiting predator. Its mother's protective instincts override personal safety as she angles her own swimming to intercept the trajectory that would bring her offspring within striking range of those terrible jaws. Hooves strike water with percussive force as multiple zebras thrash toward the far bank, their combined effort creating waves and disturbances that confuse the targeting systems of underwater predators, while generating the acoustic chaos that might mask individual locations. The surface churns with black and white bodies fighting against brown water, a scene of controlled panic where survival depends on maintaining direction despite overwhelming sensory confusion. The first zebras to reach the far bank scramble up the muddy slope with legs that shake from exhaustion and adrenaline, their successful crossing providing encouragement for those still struggling in the water, while creating a safe zone where rescued animals can recover from their ordeal. Each successful landing reduces the pressure on those still exposed to the river's dangers. The crocodile's attack comes with explosive suddenness, massive jaws erupting from the brown water in a fountain of spray and violence that sends shock waves through every animal within sight. The target manages to avoid the worst of the assault through a desperate leap that carries it clear of the striking range, landing in shallower water where speed becomes possible again. Blood clouds the water where teeth found flesh, but the injury appears survivable as the wounded zebra continues its desperate swim toward safety. The attack has galvanized the remaining swimmers into maximum effort, every animal understanding that hesitation or inefficiency could result in becoming the next target for predators whose hunting strategy depends on selecting the weakest or most isolated prey. The last foal reaches the safety of the far bank just as exhaustion threatens to overcome its ability to maintain forward motion, tiny legs that have given everything finally finding purchase on solid ground. The successful crossing of the youngest and most vulnerable members signals victory for the entire herd, though the cost in energy and stress will affect every animal for days to come. The muddy slope on the far side becomes a staging area for recovery and regrouping 43 zebras, whose successful crossing has earned them passage to the next phase of their migration route. The river continues its brown flow behind them, carrying the memory of violence and the promise of similar challenges for other herds that will face the same deadly crossing in the days and weeks to come. Plague of tsetse flies. The swarm arrives like a living cloud, millions of wings creating a sound that begins as distant humming and builds to a roar that drowns out normal conversation between herd members. These are not the ordinary flies that plague us during normal days, but the seasonal explosion of tsetse flies, whose bite carries disease and whose numbers can overwhelm even the most sophisticated defensive behaviors that evolution has provided for dealing with insect harassment. The air itself becomes thick with flying bodies, each insect guided by chemical sensors that can detect warm-blooded prey from remarkable distances. Their approach transforms the peaceful afternoon into a battle zone where every breath threatens to draw flying pests into nostrils and mouths, where keeping eyes open becomes an exercise in tolerance for constant irritation from insects that show no respect for the vulnerable membranes they assault. My tail becomes a weapon of constant motion, whipping through arcs designed to create zones of turbulence that might discourage the most persistent attackers, while providing momentary relief for the areas of hide within reach of its bristling length. The motion requires energy that my body can barely spare, yet the alternative is surrender to torment that could drive any animal to the edge of madness through sheer persistence. The synchronized tail flicking of 43 zebras creates its own rhythm, a percussion section of survival that speaks to the collective response required when individual defensive measures prove inadequate against overwhelming numbers. The sound becomes hypnotic, a metronomic reminder that survival sometimes requires coordinated action, even for something as simple as pest control. Around us, other species demonstrate their own strategies for coping with the insect invasion. Buffalo wallow in mud holes that coat their hide with protective layers of dried earth, while elephants use their ears as fans and their trunks to spray dust that creates temporary barriers against the flying assault. Each species has evolved techniques suited to their anatomy and lifestyle, creating a diverse array of defensive responses to the same fundamental challenge. The red-billed oxpeckers that normally provide grooming services transform into allies of crucial importance, their sharp beaks working overtime to snatch flies from the air and pick them from our hide with mechanical precision. These small birds become partners in survival, their own hunger for insects perfectly aligned with our desperate need for relief from the relentless attack. The symbiotic relationship intensifies under pressure, mutual benefit becoming mutual necessity. Seeking relief, we move toward the scattered fever trees, whose aromatic bark provides natural repellent properties that create zones of relative sanctuary from the worst of the insect assault. The tree's chemical defenses, evolved to protect against herbivore browsing, prove equally effective against flying pests, whose sensory systems are overwhelmed by the strong botanical odors that mask our mammalian scent signatures. The acrid smell of crushed fever tree bark fills our nostrils as we rub against the rough surface, coating our hide with aromatic oils that serve as natural insecticide. The behavior requires abandoning normal caution about approaching fixed objects that could conceal predators, but the desperation of the fly plague overrides usual safety protocols in favor of immediate relief from torment. My breathing becomes labored as the constant need to avoid inhaling insects forces shallow, careful respiration that fails to provide adequate oxygen for normal activity levels. The simple act of breathing requires conscious attention and timing to avoid the flying masses that seem determined to explore every opening in my anatomy. Even basic life functions become complicated when the air itself carries hostile life forms. Grazing becomes nearly impossible as the flies concentrate around my muzzle, drawn by the moisture and warmth of breath and saliva. Each attempt to crop grass must be timed between momentary lulls in the assault. Quick bites followed by head shaking that might dislodge the insects that immediately settle on newly exposed skin. Feeding efficiency drops dramatically when pest control requires constant attention. The psychological pressure of the unending attack begins to affect behavior patterns, creating stress responses that could prove more dangerous than the flies themselves. Panic reactions to insect swarms have been known to trigger stampedes that injure more animals than the original irritation. Collective behavior that amplifies individual discomfort into herd-level catastrophe. Hours pass without relief, the swarm maintaining its intensity with the persistence of a natural force that recognizes no limitation except the eventual exhaustion of its own life cycle. The flies show no signs of diminishing numbers or reduced aggression, their biological imperative to feed driving them to ignore all defensive measures and continue their assault regardless of the energy we expend in resistance. Dust baths become community events as multiple zebras seek simultaneous relief in the same wallow, our combined rolling creating clouds of particles that provide temporary sanctuary, while forcing us into closer proximity than normal social spacing would allow. The usual territorial boundaries dissolve under the pressure of shared misery, individual space sacrificed for collective defense against a common enemy. The constant irritation affects sleep patterns, making the standing rest that normally provides recovery impossible when insects continue their assault regardless of our level of consciousness. Exhaustion accumulates as the basic restoration processes that sustain life become disrupted by attackers that show no respect for the biological necessities that govern mammalian existence. Young foals suffer disproportionately from the plague, their inexperience with defensive techniques and smaller size making them particularly vulnerable to the overwhelming assault. Mothers increase their protective vigilance, using their own bodies as shields while teaching proper defensive behaviors through demonstration and gentle correction. The education becomes urgent when comfort transforms into survival skill. Relief comes finally through the simple passage of time as the swarm's life cycle reaches its natural conclusion, millions of insects suddenly dispersing as biological clocks signal the end of their coordinated feeding frenzy. The air clears gradually, allowing normal breathing and behavior patterns to resume, while our battered nervous systems slowly readjust to the absence of constant harassment. The aftermath reveals hide raw from excessive scratching and rubbing, energy reserves depleted by hours of constant defensive activity, and stress levels that will require days to return to normal baselines. Yet survival has been achieved through persistence and cooperation. Another trial endured through the application of techniques evolved over countless generations of similar challenges. Rival Stallion Challenge. The challenger appears on the horizon like a storm building toward inevitable collision, his presence disrupting the peaceful afternoon with the electric tension that precedes territorial conflict. His approach carries the unmistakable swagger of a male in his prime, confident in his strength and motivated by the biological imperative to claim breeding rights through combat if necessary. The very air seems to vibrate with approaching violence, as two powerful animals prepare to test their genetic worth against each other. Our current stallion recognizes the threat immediately, his posture shifting from relaxed grazing to the alert stance of a warrior, evaluating an opponent's capabilities while calculating strategies for the confrontation that can no longer be avoided. His neck arches with controlled aggression, muscles defined beneath a coat that has been tested by 3 seasons of successful leadership. Experience has taught him when diplomacy might work and when only strength can resolve territorial disputes. The rival's coat gleams with the health and vigor of an animal at the peak of physical condition, his stride covering ground with the efficiency of a creature whose body has been honed by constant travel and regular combat. His scars tell stories of previous victories, evidence that this challenge represents not inexperienced ambition, but the calculated aggression of a proven fighter whose success rate justifies his confidence in direct confrontation. The distance between the two males closes with deliberate slowness, each step a tactical decision in the psychological warfare that precedes actual physical contact. Their eyes lock across the diminishing space, reading posture and movement for signs of weakness or hesitation that might influence the outcome before hooves and teeth determine the winner through more direct means. The air fills with tension that affects every member of the herd. Squealing challenges pierce the afternoon calm as vocal intimidation becomes part of the pre-combat ritual, each stallion testing the other's resolve while advertising his own fitness to any mare within hearing range. The sounds carry across vast distances, announcing to other males that territory is being contested, and to females that genetic quality is being tested through the ancient process of combat selection that shapes breeding rights. The first physical contact comes in the form of neck wrestling, powerful muscles straining against each other as the combatants test strength and balance without committing to the more dangerous tactics of striking and biting. Their bodies interlock in a dance of controlled violence, each seeking advantage through leverage and positioning, while maintaining the option to disengage if the cost of victory begins to exceed its potential benefits. Dust clouds rise around the circling fighters as hooves strike earth with the force of bodies operating at maximum capacity, their movements creating small explosions of particles that catch afternoon light and transform the combat zone into something approaching the mythical. The visual effect adds drama to proceedings that already carry life-altering implications for winner, loser, and every female whose reproductive future hangs on the outcome. The chest-pushing phase escalates the conflict to a test of pure power, shoulder muscles bulging as each stallion attempts to drive his opponent backward through the application of overwhelming force. Their breathing becomes labored as cardiovascular systems struggle to fuel the massive energy expenditure required for sustained maximum effort. Sweat darkens their coats, despite the relatively cool temperature of late afternoon. Teeth flash as the combat escalates beyond tests of strength to include the weapons that can inflict serious damage on opponents whose guard drops for even an instant. Necks become primary targets, the vulnerable area where major blood vessels run close to the surface and where a well-placed bite could end the conflict decisively. Each attack requires split-second timing and perfect accuracy to be effective. The incumbent stallion's experience shows in his defensive technique. Years of successful territory, defense providing knowledge about when to yield ground and when to stand firm against pressure that could overwhelm less seasoned fighters. His strategy combines conservation of energy with precise application of force, the wisdom of maturity competing against the raw power and determination of youth seeking to establish its own dominance. Blood appears on both combatants as teeth find their targets, crimson evidence that the contest has moved beyond symbolic posturing to actual warfare where careers and genetics hang in the balance. The wounds galvanize both fighters, pain triggering the adrenaline responses that can push performance beyond normal physical limitations while reducing sensitivity to further injury. The challenger's stamina becomes apparent as the fight continues without decisive resolution, his conditioning allowing sustained effort that suggests he has prepared specifically for this type of prolonged combat. His breathing remains controlled, while his movements show no decrease in power or coordination, evidence that this confrontation represents planned aggression rather than opportunistic challenge. Gradually, the incumbent begins to show signs of fatigue that his younger opponent exploits through increased aggression and more frequent attempts at decisive attacks. Age and the accumulated stress of territory maintenance begin to tell against the raw energy of a challenger whose only current responsibility is winning this single combat. The tide of battle shifts with subtle but unmistakable momentum. The final phase arrives when the defender's guard drops fractionally, creating the opening that the challenger has been seeking throughout the extended combat. A perfectly timed bite to the neck area forces a submission that ends the contest without requiring the lethal escalation that could leave both animals vulnerable to predators or environmental hazards. Victory has been achieved through superior conditioning rather than lucky strike. The defeated stallion's withdrawal carries the dignity of a warrior who has fought honorably but accepted the verdict of combat. His departure, opening the way for new leadership, while preserving his life for future opportunities in different territories. His scars will heal, his experience will grow, and his genes may yet find expression through different breeding opportunities that do not require defeating this particular opponent. The new stallion's victory celebration includes displays directed toward the mares whose breeding rights he has claimed through combat, demonstrating the fitness that earned him leadership, while beginning the complex process of establishing dominance over a herd that must accept new authority. His rule begins immediately, though full acceptance will require time and successful leadership through the challenges that test every stallion's fitness for the role. Drought decision point. The waterhole that sustained us through the early stages of the dry season has shrunk to a puddle of mud and desperation, its banks trampled to concrete hardness by the hooves of countless animals who have drunk its level down past the point of easy recovery. What remains tastes of concentrated minerals and the waste products of too many creatures sharing too little water Yet even this fouled remnant represents life for those desperate enough to overlook its degraded quality. The decision that faces our herd carries implications that extend far beyond immediate comfort. A choice between the known scarcity of familiar territory and the unknown risks of migration toward water sources that may or may not exist in sufficient quantity to support our survival. Maps drawn in genetic memory provide guidance about traditional routes, but climate patterns have shifted enough to make historical knowledge uncertain guidance for current reality. Kessie stands motionless at the edge of the diminishing pool, her scarred muzzle testing air that carries no promise of nearby relief, while her experienced eyes read the landscape for signs that might indicate the presence of water beyond the visible horizon. 3 decades of successful survival have taught her to distinguish between desperate hope and realistic assessment, between wishful thinking and the practical evaluation that separates living animals from bones bleaching in the sun. The younger animals watch her with the intensity of students whose final examination could determine whether they see another wet season, understanding that decisions made in the next few hours will affect every aspect of their existence for weeks or months to come. Their inexperience with crisis decision-making makes them dependent on the wisdom of elders whose previous choices have proven their ability to navigate successfully through similar challenges. Around the dwindling water source, other species face identical dilemmas with varying degrees of desperation and hope. Elephants, with their vast water requirements, show signs of preparing for long-distance migration, while smaller antelopes whose needs are more modest appear willing to gamble on local conditions, improving before their reserves are completely exhausted. Each species calculates the equation of survival according to its own biological constraints and mobility capabilities. The silent voting process begins as individual zebras make unconscious movements that indicate their preference for staying or departing, subtle shifts in position and orientation that create patterns readable by animals whose social awareness has been refined through countless group decisions where consensus, rather than dominance, determines collective action. The democratic process happens below the level of conscious thought, guided by instincts that weigh personal preference against group survival. The psychological weight of the decision presses against every member of the herd with the force of choices that cannot be undone once made. Commitment to either strategy, requiring total dedication of limited energy reserves that cannot be divided between conflicting approaches. Hesitation or half measures in crisis situations typically result in the worst possible outcomes, failure to achieve either the benefits of staying or the advantages of movement. Evidence accumulates through subtle environmental indicators that suggest the local situation will deteriorate further before any improvement becomes possible. Signs that experienced animals learn to read in the behavior of plants and insects, whose responses to moisture levels provide early warning about changing conditions. The fever tree's leaf drop indicates water stress that extends deep into root systems, while the absence of certain insects suggests that even the most drought-resistant species are beginning to fail. The distant mountains shimmer in heat haze that could conceal clouds building toward afternoon thunderstorms, or could represent nothing more than thermal distortion created by superheated air rising from sun-baked rock. Reading the signs requires experience that separates realistic hope from the desperate hallucinations that can lead dying animals toward mirages instead of actual salvation. The difference between accurate assessment and wishful thinking becomes a matter of life and death. Young foals cluster near their mothers with the instinctive understanding that major changes are under consideration, their inexperience making them entirely dependent on adult decision-making, while their presence adds weight to choices that must account for the reduced mobility and increased vulnerability of animals too young to sustain long-distance travel without adequate hydration. The wind direction becomes crucial information, as air currents carry scent messages from distant areas where recent rainfall might have created temporary water sources, or where other herds have found sufficient resources to maintain their scent of calm. presence in specific territories. The chemical signatures of hope and desperation travel on the same currents, requiring sophisticated interpretation to distinguish between messages that promise relief and those that warn of competition for inadequate resources. Individual energy reserves factor into the decision matrix, as each animal unconsciously evaluates its own capacity for sustained travel against the risks of remaining in territory whose carrying capacity has already been exceeded. The strongest animals might survive a long migration that would kill the weakest, while the most vulnerable might last longer in familiar territory despite its diminishing resources. The moment of decision arrives without fanfare, marked only by the subtle shift in herd orientation that indicates consensus has emerged from the complex negotiation between individual needs and collective wisdom. The choice, once made, becomes irrevocable as energy reserves begin their commitment to either the maintenance of territory or the challenges of migration toward uncertain salvation. Movement begins with the measured pace of animals whose survival depends on efficient energy utilization, each step calculated to maximize progress while preserving strength for the challenges that lie ahead. The familiar territory disappears behind us as we commit to the ancient gamble that has shaped migration patterns for countless generations, betting survival against the promise of water that exists only in memory and hope. The horizon ahead offers no guarantees, only the possibility that movement toward traditional water sources might provide the salvation that staying would certainly deny. The decision has been made through the democratic process that governs herd survival, individual wisdom combining into collective action, that will determine whether our genes continue their journey through time or join the countless others that have failed to navigate successfully through the challenges that define existence on the African plains. Scent of distant storms. The first trace arrives as a whisper of possibility, carried on a wind that has traveled across hundreds of kilometers to bring news of transformation gathering beyond the horizon. My nostrils detect the subtle shift in atmospheric chemistry that speaks of moisture building in distant clouds, that faint but unmistakable signature of ozone and electrical activity that precedes the seasonal salvation every creature on the plains has been praying for without words. The scent contains layers of information written in molecules too small for conscious detection, yet powerful enough to trigger responses that go deeper than thought. Water vapor carries the promise of green grass and flowing streams, while the sharp tang of lightning speaks of the electromagnetic violence that accompanies the atmospheric upheavals necessary to transform drought into abundance. Each breath draws in hope, made manifest in chemical form. My body responds to these airborne messages with anticipation that manifests in increased heart rate and heightened alertness. Biological systems, recognizing the approach of conditions that could mean the difference between survival and extinction for every warm-blooded creature within 1,000 square kilometers. The information travels faster than any messenger could carry it, chemistry providing early warning that allows preparation for the transformation about to reshape our world. Around me, the herd begins to show the subtle signs of animals whose instincts have detected opportunity approaching from beyond the visible world. Ears prick with enhanced attention, while nostrils flare to catch every trace of the atmospheric changes that herald the end of our long ordeal. The collective alertness creates its own energy, anticipation feeding on itself until the very air seems charged with possibility. Other species throughout the ecosystem respond to the same chemical signals with behavior patterns that speak to the universal significance of the approaching change. Birds that have been absent during the harshest months begin to appear in increasing numbers, their presence adding confirmatory evidence that the atmospheric conditions necessary for abundance are building beyond our current perception. The wind direction becomes crucial, as air currents that have been flowing from barren areas begin to shift toward moisture-laden systems approaching from regions where clouds have already begun their work of transformation. Each change in wind pattern brings stronger traces of the humidity that will soon remake our landscape from brown wasteland to green paradise, if we can survive long enough to benefit from the approaching miracle. Dust devils continue to dance across the superheated plain, but their behavior begins to change in subtle ways that suggest atmospheric instability building toward the thunderstorms that will break the drought's grip on our territory. The thermal dynamics that create these miniature tornadoes provide early warning about pressure systems that are still too distant to see, but powerful enough to influence local weather patterns. The migration columns that have been forming throughout the region begin to show the effects of widespread atmospheric changes. Herds that were moving desperately toward uncertain water sources, now pausing to reassess their strategies, based on information that suggests salvation might come to them, rather than requiring the energy expenditure of continued travel. The chemistry of hope changes the mathematics of survival. Young animals seem particularly sensitive to the atmospheric changes, their nervous systems perhaps more attuned to environmental fluctuations that older animals have learned to filter out through experience. With false alarms and disappointed expectations, their excitement becomes infectious, spreading through the herd with the energy of creatures who are discovering that the world might contain more possibilities than current conditions suggest. The electromagnetic sensitivity that allows animals to detect approaching storms begins to register the distant electrical activity that accompanies large weather systems, creating sensations that manifest as restlessness and anticipation among creatures whose survival has depended on the ability to read atmospheric conditions with precision that exceeds any technological monitoring system. Humidity levels that have been negligible for months begin to show the first traces of increase. Moisture content in the air, rising by increments so small they barely register on conscious awareness, yet significant enough to trigger responses in animals whose lives depend on detecting the earliest possible signs of environmental change. The desert begins its retreat before the advancing army of water-laden clouds. The horizon that has been empty of promise for endless weeks begins to show the faint smudges that might indicate distant clouds building toward the critical mass necessary for rain production, or might represent nothing more than heat, distortion, and wishful thinking. Reading these signs requires the accumulated wisdom of animals who have survived multiple drought cycles and learned to distinguish between genuine hope and cruel hallucination. Synchronized movement begins spontaneously as multiple herds throughout the region respond to the same atmospheric cues, creating migration patterns that will position animals to take maximum advantage of the rainfall when it arrives. The coordination happens without communication between groups, guided by instincts that have been refined through countless generations of successful storm anticipation. Rainbow fragments begin to appear in the afternoon sky, prismatic effects created by moisture and light that provide visual confirmation of the atmospheric changes that chemical sensors have been detecting for hours. These fleeting displays of color against the harsh blue dome overhead offer the first visible evidence that the conditions necessary for rain are assembling beyond our immediate perception. The scent grows stronger with each passing hour, humidity increasing to levels that make breathing feel different, and skin respond with sensations that have been absent for months. The air itself becomes an ally rather than an enemy, carrying moisture instead of dust, and offering the promise of relief instead of the constant reminder of scarcity and want. Hope builds within the herd as collective awareness of the approaching transformation creates a shared sense of anticipation that transcends individual survival concerns and becomes a celebration of the cyclical nature of abundance. Scarcity that defines existence on the African plains. We have endured the trial and earned the right to benefit from the reward that follows persistence through hardship. The first drops are still hours or days away, but their arrival has become inevitable rather than merely possible, the atmospheric chemistry providing guarantees that override the visual evidence of continued drought. The scent of distant storms carries the promise that our gamble on survival has succeeded, that the ancient rhythms of rain and renewal continue their eternal dance, despite human attempts to alter the climate that shapes all life on Earth. The wind picks up with the early signs of weather systems beginning to interact. Air currents bringing stronger traces of the moisture that will soon transform our brown world into the green paradise that memory insists is possible, despite all evidence to the contrary. We prepare for abundance with the patience of creatures who understand that survival requires faith in cycles larger than individual experience.